What do you do when you fall for someone you absolutely shouldn't? My name is Elara Vanya, and honestly, I should have packed my bags the minute I saw him. If I had, maybe I wouldn't be here now, trying to make sense of how everything went so violently, terribly right. When I stepped into the Aegis Citadel, I was ready for a job, a performance. I was the princess diplomat from tiny, stubborn Lyra, sent to marry their heir, Prince Theron. Our marriage was supposed to secure peace, a contract, nothing more. And Theron, he was the state's favorite blade, cold, sharp, precise. He wore control like armor, and I hated him for it. I had one rule drilled into me by my mother, Queen Isolde: control is safety. Never show emotion, never show weakness. My father taught me duty, but my mother taught me survival, and she'd never been wrong. So I was fine. I had my walls, my mission, my secret mission. And I was prepared to play my part, no matter how much his arrogance grated on me. But this isn't a story about kingdoms making peace. This is the story of the 2 months someone tried to sabotage the treaty by killing us both. And the only person who knew every secret I carried, the only one who saw every crack in the mask I'd worn my whole life, was the man I wasn't supposed to want, the man I was expected to hate. Yes, the threat was external, but the real damage? That happened inside. This is the story of when I realized being safe had become the loneliest place in the world, and that the biggest risk I ever took wasn't for my kingdom. It was for his hand, his touch, and the terrifying feeling that grew between us. Everything I did was treason to my duty. But I couldn't stop. Listen closely, because trust me, you won't believe how badly I managed to ruin the one job I was sent here to do. I stepped off the carriage, and the Citadel hit me like a wall of ice. Not the kind that stings your fingers. This one burrowed under your ribs and locked everything tight. Every stone in that fortress seemed to whisper a warning. One wrong move and everything shatters. The guards stood too straight. The towers cut the sky at angles that felt like accusations. Even the gates loomed as if they were daring me to enter. The courtyard looked empty, but the silence was loaded, like the moment right before someone pulls a trigger. I counted exits, vantage points, shadows that held too many possibilities. I didn't trust any of them. The satchel at my side, treaty, intelligence, emergency notes added an extra pull to my shoulder. Useful, yes. Comforting, sure. But also a reminder that one slip could cost me everything. My mission, my life, and whatever flimsy piece our kingdoms were clinging to. The Citadel doors towered above me, carved with dragons frozen mid-roar. No warmth, no welcome, just warning. My heels clicked over the stone as I walked forward, each echo a countdown. I noted everything. Sentries, banners, symmetry. Nothing here happened by accident. I tucked every detail away like ammunition. Inside, the air smelled of iron, cold stone, and a faint trace of old fire. Shadows stretched across the high ceilings, making the hall feel both cavernous and crowded. Guards twitched at every sound. The steward's shoulders were a knot of tension. Everyone in that place was waiting. For what? I didn't know. But it wasn't me. I forced my breath steady. No one could see the tremor in my fingers or the tiny hitch in my chest. Emotions were a liability here. I scanned every inch of the hall, noting escape routes, blind corners, potential traps. This fortress wasn't a home. It was a battlefield. And I knew, deep in my gut, that the real war wasn't outside its walls. It was inside them. I told myself I was ready. I wasn't sure I believed it. But even as I braced myself, I felt it. That eerie sensation that the Citadel itself was watching me. Judging, measuring, and I wasn't sure I wanted to know how I'd score. The chamber was colder than the Citadel, or maybe it was him. I remember seeing him for the first time across the polished table. The Crown Prince of Aegis sat perfectly still, hands resting on the treaty like it was a game piece instead of my kingdom's lifeline. He didn't stand, didn't greet me, just lifted his head and looked at me with sharp, assessing eyes, as if he'd already weighed every word I might say and dismissed half of them. A jolt shot through me. Not fear, contempt. Disciplined, controlled, and very much mutual. I took my seat slowly, deliberately. Every motion said, I'm here, I'm steady, I don't scare easy. My fingers skimmed the edge of the treaty, noting the seal, the imperfections in the parchment. Details mattered. They always mattered. Let's begin, he said, quiet, unemotional, but precise enough to cut. I nodded once and read through the document line by line, tracking every implication, and I watched him. His jaw, his fingers, the way he leaned a fraction closer when a clause favored Aegis. He didn't speak unless it was necessary, and when he did, each word was a measured tool. "Your kingdom's interests are noted," he said, voice flat. Challenge detected. I gave him a polite blade in return. "As are yours, Your Highness," noted with equal precision. His eyes flicked up. Something shifted. Recognition, annoyance, maybe both. It didn't matter. I filed it away. When I finally signed the treaty, my name felt heavier than the ink. My fate tied irrevocably to this man I loathed. And for a heartbeat, our eyes met. His expression was a mask, but not a perfect one. A crack, small but visible. I stood, every ounce of composure pulled tight around me. He mirrored me, our movements almost synchronized. A silent standoff. This wasn't a meeting. It was the opening shot of a very long war. And as I turned to leave, I knew one thing for certain: nothing in Veritas or Aegis could have prepared me for him. The feeling didn't last. Because the next moment, the one that made my stomach drop, was buried in the fine print. I was bent over the treaty, checking every clause when I saw it. Shared quarters, not adjacent, not connected, shared. One private wing, one set of chambers, bedrooms included. My pulse slammed into my temples. This wasn't logistics, this was strategy. Brutal, elegant strategy. A cage disguised as hospitality. By forcing proximity, they were stripping away my last sanctuary, my privacy, my control, my ability to regroup. Theron's name flickered through my mind, uninvited. The man with the expression that didn't change. The man who saw too much with a single glance. And now I'd be living within arm's reach of him. I set the pen down slowly. My fingers ached from how tightly I'd been holding on. There was no way around it. No loophole. No clever pivot. I inhaled, the air sharp and metallic. My mind raced through every scenario. Crossing paths at night, quiet footsteps in the dark, the impossible task of staying unread with him that close. My sanctuary was gone. I felt the cage close around me in one smooth, silent motion. And beneath the dread, something else twisted, an awareness of how effective the tactic was. Aegis didn't build cages out of bars. They built them out of circumstances. I whispered the truth, barely audible. I would be sharing the most private space I had with him. It hit like a stone, heavy, final. And in that moment, I knew I was trapped. But what came next, that was worse. I didn't have time for panic. I moved through the suite slowly, deliberately. The door shut behind me with a soft click, sealing me inside. The room was breathtaking in a way that felt weaponized. Heavy drapes lined with iron, chandeliers that turned light into something sharp. Even the scent, polished wood and waxed stone, felt curated. Every detail radiated intent. I crossed to the sitting area. Velvet chairs arranged at angles that forced engagement but allowed quiet scrutiny. Someone had designed this room for power play, not comfort. I crouched to study the rug. A pattern that looked decorative at first glance but mapped the room's natural flow. Routes for approach, escape, advantage. If I needed to run or hide, I already knew where. A portrait on the far wall caught my eye. A former ruler of Aegis. Calm pose, deadly eyes. Every detail a warning. Power here is calculated, and failure is expensive. I brushed my fingers along a console table, checking for hidden mechanisms. Nothing, yet. But in this place, nothing was ever just decoration. Everything could be a tool or a trap. The suite was a gilded cage, seductive and ruthless. A battlefield dressed as luxury. And even though I was alone, I could already feel him here. My chest tightened. Surviving the Citadel wasn't about diplomacy. It was about understanding the battlefield. And I understood it. I just wasn't sure I could survive it. What I discovered next made me question just how deep this trap truly went. I was crouched by the console table, fingertips tracing the edge, mapping the suite in my mind when the door opened. My stomach did that quick, sick twist you only get when someone appears where they absolutely shouldn't. And there he was, Theron, calm and controlled, like he'd stepped straight out of my thoughts, perfectly still in the doorway. I froze, my fingers clamped around the table. My heart spiked, blood rushing so loud it felt like it filled the room. My breath hitched before I could stop it, shallow, fast, humiliating. Panic shot up my spine and lodged itself behind my eyes in cold, sharp points. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, watching, waiting. And that silence, God's, that silence was a blade. It made me confront exactly what he'd seen. The tremor in my fingers, the quick, stupid dart of my eyes toward the door, the tiny, unforgivable slip of my mask. Every part of me felt too loud. The quiver in my jaw, the way my shoulders had curled in without permission, the tight squeeze in my chest like invisible hands were crushing my ribs. And through all of it, he watched me like a storm thinking about breaking. I wanted to apologize or disappear. Anything. Instead, I swallowed the instinct and tried to force the fear into something that looked like composure. It didn't work. Not even a little. Every second was a reckoning, and I was losing. His eyes gave nothing away, but I felt them, heavy, precise. I had been careful, meticulous, and in one stupid moment, I'd let it slip. The fear of exposure, the part of me I never let anyone touch, sat there between us, raw and bare. Still, he said nothing, and the silence punished more than any accusation could. Seconds stretched until my skin felt transparent, my thoughts audible, my heartbeat thunderous in the cold, echoing sweet. I wanted to shrink, to scream. I did neither. I almost couldn't breathe as one vicious thought hit me. If he could catch me like this in one quiet second, what would he do when the real stakes arrived? I knew, right then, I was finished. But what followed was worse. The moment hung between us, frozen, and I realized I had exactly one option: patch the damage or fall apart right there. I straightened, shoulders back, spine tight, as if posture alone could shove the fear out of my body. My pulse still raced, chest tight, but my face settled into the mask I wore best. Untouchable, unshakable, nothing to see here calm. Vulnerability was a weapon someone else could use. Against me. Against Veritas. I'd learned that lesson with teeth. Once was enough. Never again. I locked eyes with him. Steady. Flat. He didn't blink. His jaw was tight, iron over a secret, but his gaze flicked over me, and I knew he'd already seen too much. I didn't let myself react. I couldn't. I'd been cornered before and survived by clinging to control. Absolute control. Every instinct told me to retreat into some quiet corner and gather myself. I ignored it. I stepped closer instead, just enough to make a point, chin rising a fraction. My look dared him. Comment. Try it. You won't win. The mask settled back into place, familiar and sharp, but this time it wasn't just a shield. It felt like a weapon, sharpened by fear, by exposure, by the terrifying possibility he might have power over me. I inhaled, slow and steady, forcing my nerves into line. My mind recorded everything about him, his stance, the tension in his shoulders, the flat calm in his eyes. I'd use it later. I would use everything. I'd survived him seeing a crack, barely. But the truth was merciless. One more slip could be fatal. Vulnerability was lethal. Not here, not with him. So I straightened a part of myself I didn't even know had slumped and held his stare, daring him to push, daring him to try, and in that quiet, as he studied me, I made a private promise. No one, not him, not fate, would ever see me break like that again. I was unshakable, or I'd pretend hard enough to pass for it. But even as I made the vow, I knew keeping this mask welded to my skin would be the hardest thing I'd ever done. Theron moved through the suite like he owned it. Every inch, every shadow, every breath. He didn't, of course. Not yet. But the precision in his steps said he expected to. He crossed to the side table, picked up a folded handkerchief, smoothed it twice, and placed it back exactly where it had been. Every move was deliberate, controlled, ridiculous. I watched his fingers trail along the desk, watched his eyes flick to the window and back as he calculated angles and light like he was preparing for battle. Cold, clinical, almost theatrical. I cataloged everything, his little tics, his rituals, the careful order he pretended was natural. He called it control. I called it brittle. Steel snapped under the right pressure, and I fully intended to find the right pressure. He opened the closet, frowned at the hang of the garments, and closed it again. Completely unnecessary. That wasn't inspection. That was a declaration. I noted the sequence. Left hand on fabric, right cuff adjusted, slight nod. Habit. Predictable. Perfect. A smile tugged at my mouth, hidden behind the mask, of course. A rhythm like that? I could use it. A tick here, a pause there. Easy spots to pry open. Every object he touched, every tiny expression, told me exactly who he believed he was. And every one sharpened my contempt. He wore control like a crown, convinced it made him invulnerable. But control is also a cage, and cages always have hinges. I memorized everything. Every beat, every glance. Not for affection, not for curiosity, for survival. For the precise moment I'd need to use it. And he didn't even notice me watching. By the time he stepped back from his absurdly aligned stack of papers, I had already mapped every weak point in his armor, and I knew that the second he underestimated me, even a little, he'd regret it. I was ready for him. Or at least I needed to believe I was. Contempt wasn't emotion, it was strategy, and this suite, this cursed shared suite, was already the battlefield. The knock at the door was sharp and exact, just like him. I didn't flinch. Outwardly. "Enter," I said, crisp and professional. He stepped inside and shut the door with a soft click that somehow echoed through the whole room. His gaze swept everything in one calculated arc before landing on me, a beat too long. "We need to set some ground rules," he said. "No greeting, no lead-in, just a flat line of authority meant to level the room." I raised a brow. "Rules? For what? The treaty's already signed." "This is about the public performance," he said. "You will adhere to it, completely. Deviations will not be tolerated." I folded my arms. His words were sterile, but the subtext was carved deep. Here were the boundaries of everything else, the image we'd project, the lie we'd live. "No touching," he added, as if the phrase could magically erase all proximity. My lips twitched. Cute. "And you will not access certain archives in the Citadel without my authorization." There it was. The first cage, a direct obstacle to my mission. It stung, but it didn't stop me. I tipped my head. "Authorization, of course, and I trust you understand I operate under my own directives first." His eyes narrowed, a tiny flicker, but visible. A small, precious admission. He didn't control me entirely, yet. "You will also maintain consistent appearances," he said. "No slip-ups. The public must not see the truth between us." I let out a slow breath. "Consistency," I echoed. "Duly noted." Meanwhile, my mind spun through possible loopholes. Rigid rules always had them. He stepped closer, ignoring the space between us. "This is not negotiable." "I understand," I said, even and smooth, and in the corner of my mind, gears turned. I could bend rules without breaking them, work around the edges, move unseen. His stare was sharp enough to cut. I met it with my own challenge. "Try me. See how fast I turn your rules into leverage." He didn't comment. He didn't have to. He left with the weight of all those restrictions hanging in the air behind him, and I knew every rule he laid down was a weapon, one I intended to disarm. The silence after he left hit the suite like a pulse. No footsteps, no rigid presence, just me, and the door clicking shut behind him. Rules set, boundaries drawn. And yet, I couldn't resist. I moved to his desk. The papers, stacked with agonizing precision, practically begged for disruption. My fingers hovered over the top file, his schedule, before nudging it just slightly left. Not obvious, just enough that I'd know. A soft thrill shot through me. Petty? Absolutely, but deliciously mine. Then I shifted his pen, his favorite black fountain pen, positioned with absurd care. I angled it half an inch off, asymmetry, chaos, a tiny, perfect rebellion. My heartbeat picked up, not from fear, but from the quiet audacity of it. Disruption without detection. Next, a book. One of his alphabetized treaty volumes. I slid it a fraction along the shelf. Barely anything. But the message was there. I'm here. Not just the diplomat, me. I straightened and studied the room. Everything looked the same, but I knew better. And he wouldn't see it immediately. That was the victory. A small one, but mine. And in that quiet, I realized the war had already started, and I'd just made the opening move. The thrill faded fast, replaced by something sharper. Observation mode. Strategy mode. I couldn't just move his things and call it tactical brilliance. I needed to know him. Every detail. Every micro-pattern. That was how I survived. Maybe even controlled the chaos he embodied. So I watched, not with feeling, with analysis. His posture, too precise to be natural. Mechanical, like he'd trained himself into a shape. His shoulders were uneven, left higher. Habit? Old injury? Something worse? I cataloged it. His hands moved with exact precision, except for the tiny flick at the base of his thumb, a twitch he clearly didn't expect anyone to catch. I caught it anyway. Then the scars, hidden under his sleeve. Ordered, deliberate. Someone had marked him with intent, or he'd done it himself. Either way, leverage. His face offered even less. Tiny tension around the jaw, faint shadows beneath his eyes. Fatigue, memory, regret, all possibilities filed away. And his gaze, God's, his gaze, always scanning, always anticipating. Perfection up top, fractures underneath. The longer I watched, the clearer it became. His perfection was a mask too. A different one, a rigid one. And if perfection cracked even once, it could be used. I leaned back, letting the suite settle around me. Not angry, not scared, just calculating. Data was power, and I was already gathering more than he'd ever expect. The thought sent a slow, dark thrill through me. Strategy without compromise. It felt almost good, but under that thrill came a colder whisper. What would happen the moment he realized I was studying him this closely? The answer sent a shiver straight through me. One wrong step and the line I was walking would snap. But I couldn't stop. Not now. Not when the war had already begun. That feeling didn't last. By morning, everything exploded. The briefing loomed, and suddenly the citadel felt smaller, tighter, like the walls were closing in. My stomach twisted, the kind of twist that screams, everyone is watching, one slip and it's over. I scanned the room like I could imprint it in one glance. Podiums lined up with surgical precision, cameras on tripods capturing every angle, microphones pointed at exactly the wrong places. Every detail mattered. Every misstep would be magnified. And in the center of it all, Theron, calm, perfect. My opposite. He approached as if it were nothing, just another chess move. Your hand, he said. My heart slammed. Not casual, not accidental. He meant this, the choreography, the touch, the presentation. My fingers hovered uncertainly. He guided them with a precision that made my skin flare. A brush, almost imperceptible, but deliberate. I swallowed hard, holding the tremble at bay. The tension radiating off him was almost visible. One wrong angle, one misaligned step, and the performance collapsed. My fingers clenched reflexively. He noticed. Of course he noticed. The silence was part of the command, a quiet, unnerving control. I ran the motions in my head, tilt of the wrist, slight squeeze of his hand, timing of a smile that had to be charming but never genuine. Every move synchronized like a duet we'd never rehearsed enough. The pressure wasn't technical alone, it was personal. To the world, partners, allies. To me, a puzzle, an enemy I could not misread. Every nerve in me buzzed, each micro-motion carried weight. His thumb brushed mine, I jerked almost imperceptibly, cursed myself for betraying instinct. And all the while, I cataloged. Every line in his posture, every move that directed me without overstepping, every hesitation predicted. This was data, patterns to decode, because on that stage there would be no room for error, no room for feeling. The briefing wasn't performance, it was battlefield. We were weapons. Or maybe, when he finally let go, he was the weapon and I had to survive him. I drew a shaky breath, forcing back composure, but the memory lingered. Just a touch, but it wasn't about press or cameras. It was about control, and he already had it. Stepping onto the stage was like plunging into freezing water. Cameras clicked, microphones hummed, every eye fixed on us. My pulse spiked, but I held my shoulders back, smiled, projected ease. Someone who'd done this 100 times, never like this, never with him. Theron was perfect, too perfect. That precision that twists your stomach makes your brain scream. He's hiding something, and he knows it. Jaw set, gaze steady. But it was the smile, measured, weaponized, not inviting. That killed me. Obedience, fear, and I hated it. Hated feeling powerless and exposed. Questions about the treaty, our kingdom's futures. We answered in sync, a single organism, each word a note in a duet neither of us admitted existed. I caught his cues, anticipating what he wanted me to say before he spoke. Then, a reporter leaned forward, voice sharp. Madam Vanya, how do you reconcile the personal sacrifices required by this treaty with your own private loyalties? My chest froze. Private loyalties. No rehearsal, no warning. Thurman's eyes flicked to mine for a fraction of a second. Suddenly, we improvised on a razor's edge. I believe the needs of the many outweigh the few, I said, tight but steady. A glance at him. Cover me. His hand brushed mine under the podium. Not improper. Subtle, grounding. He tilted his head, eyes narrowing, cue given. Loyalty, he added, is tested in action, not intention. Action defines allegiance, I echoed softer, almost mirroring. Secret coordination, seamless to the world, invisible to everyone else. The reporter pressed, are there moments you question each other's judgment? I let a faint smirk creep in. Every leader questions counsel, I said, glancing at him, but a strong front ensures confidence, publicly if not privately. Approval flickered in his gaze. A shiver of victory almost hit me. Almost. He sold the performance flawlessly, calm, untouchable. I feared the public and the private truth behind it. Nothing in him was readable. No lie, no hesitation betrayed. Applause. Cameras flashed like fireflies in a storm. We stepped down, smiles intact. Cold dread climbed my spine. I'd survived the questions, the stage, the scrutiny, but his real weapon was clear, the terrifying, effortless perfection of his mask. I didn't just have to survive him. I had to outthink him, or I'd never see daylight again. Photos, flashes like wildfire, cameras snapping, every pose dissected, every hand placement scrutinized. I forced the smile, posture perfect, watching him out of the corner of my eye. They called him unbreakable for a reason. Eyes cold, precise, unreadable. A void. I'd studied rulers, diplomats, tyrants, but this, mechanical, patient, untouchable, a flicker of doubt, pity even, stabbed me and I shoved it down hard. Feeling him was weakness. Not here, not now. Instructions barked, turn, smile, chin up, step closer. I moved in sync, ritual tightening around me. Then, a twitch. Corner of his mouth, brief narrowing of the left eye, something not meant to be seen. Doubt, frustration? I blinked, it vanished. Mask reset. Frozen perfection. I dissected it. Timing, symmetry, jaw tension, shoulder shift. Invisible to anyone else, glaring to me. A crack. Not enough yet, but a crack. Filed away. Dangerous, silent mine. Cameras stopped. World shifted. His hand brushed my arm. Just that. Fingers grazing sleeve and skin. But wait. Deliberate, contained. Heat traveled up my arm, settled in my chest. Lungs too small, heart skipping beats, brain scrambling for logic. I jerked slightly, instinctive but too late. Enough to register, enough to make me acutely aware of him, of proximity, of pressure. The brush was brief, but assertion spoke. Precision, control, personal. Sparks against dry tinder. I pulled back, breath shallow, composure forced, only an arm. Professional. Yet my system screamed betrayal. And suddenly, the tension was real. Physical, threatening, weaponized. It wouldn't vanish. I couldn't ignore it. I was completely done for. But what came next? Worse. Door closed behind me. Reality hit harder than political theater. Files dumped, reports rifled through, then I froze. A subtle line, almost laughable, if it weren't terrifying. Buried in the treaty addendum. A word misaligned, a figure inconsistent. My stomach knotted, pulse raced. I read it again and again. Each time confirmed the first thought. Someone planted this. Someone precise. Someone with access. Someone who knew exactly where to cut. Only one person could have done it. Only one person with clearance and audacity. Theron. Dots connected, circuits firing. If it were anyone else, dismissible. Him, message. Test. Warning. Signature. Hands ran down my face. Fear, not generic political panic, but the acute personal kind. Right in the room with me. My intuition correct. Observations validated. Micro-behaviors cataloged. Cost higher than imagined. Not a leak, not a mistake, internal. Calculated, direct. If I wanted to survive, I had to match him now. Line traced again. Syntax cataloged. Each word a clue, punctuation a vector. Analyst mode engaged. Cold, precise, relentless. Fear sharpened perception. Every oversight lethal. Politics no longer enough. Personal, weaponized, challenge issued, answer demanded. I leaned closer, whispered, so it begins. I was completely done for, but what came next was even worse. I went over the report again, line by line, numbers, phrasing, inconsistencies, they weren't mistakes. Surgical, timed, calculated. Someone planted it, knew where it would hit. Access logs reviewed in my mind, each name removed. Only one remained, the inner circle. Only someone at the top could pull this off. Fingers tapped desk, restless. Misstatement subtle, buried, phrasing ambiguous. Placement impossible without protocol-level clearance. Chain of proof complete. The mole, real, intentional. Validation hit like electricity. Pride flickered. My instincts, suppressed, cautious, cataloged, right. Not paranoid, not imagining. Every observation justified. Urgency followed, stakes real. They anticipated moves, hesitation could kill. Action visible. I traced the deviation. Only someone authorized. Only someone top-tier aegis. Countermeasures, contingencies, plausible deniability, all running. Diplomat? No. Analyst, spy, counter-strategist. Discrepancy wasn't puzzle, it was weapon. I had to match it. I was completely done for. But what came next? Worse. I walked into the suite, the report clutched tight, edges crumpling under my fingers. Every step felt heavier than the last, like gravity itself had decided to weigh more on truth. I traced the anomaly, verified access points, outlined the chain of culpability. Danger screamed from every corner. Deliberate, precise. And I had to tell him. I had to. Theron, I said, placing the report on the table, smoothing the folds like it could survive his scrutiny. There's a discrepancy in the trade report. Someone planted it. It's not clerical, it's deliberate. He didn't look up. His eyes scanned the room, methodical, calm, unreadable. A man who already knew the conversation before it began. I waited. Finally, he leaned back, hand brushing the table edge. "Elara," he said, voice flat, clipped, deliberate. "We cannot chase shadows. Aegis' stability comes first. Your suspicions do not override protocol." Air left my lungs in a silent whoosh. He hadn't denied the anomaly. He'd erased it from the conversation with one measured line. I wanted to argue, to make him see. But his composure wasn't casual. It was armor. Cold, absolute, untouchable. My analysis, instincts, duty, they collided against a wall of political will and bounced back, sharp and stinging. "Theron, this isn't conjecture," I pressed, voice sharper than intended. "The report shows access only someone in the inner circle could have. If we ignore this," he finally met my eyes. A shove in the chest, not physical, but just as forceful. Calm, measured, absence of hesitation, a warning. "Aegis does not operate on what-ifs, Elara. We operate on facts. Stability is paramount. I will take this under advisement. For now, trust the system. Trust the system." The words hit like glass. My meticulous trail of logic collided with a wall I couldn't breach. Contempt rose like smoke. His blind faith, his rigid precision, it infuriated me. I could see why I'd always judged him harshly. Beneath flawless posture, icy control, lay a mind trained to prioritize order over reality. I swallowed frustration, shaped it into the cold edge I relied on. Control could be challenged. Systems could be outmaneuvered. But him, calm, untouchable, was a reminder. I wasn't facing a report. I was facing a man who had mastered dismissal. I'd felt it strike. I knew then I was completely done for. But what happened next? Worse. Door shut. I leaned against it, letting his dismissal settle in my chest. Not just a no, a declaration. I was alone. Alone in the Citadel, surrounded by people who trusted the system blindly, while the threat festered, visible only to me. Choice crystallized. If I wanted the truth, if I wanted to stop the mole, I had only myself. At the desk, I scanned the data pads again, not to confirm, but to dig. Weak links, protocol gaps, routine access logs, they all screamed opportunity. Acting quietly meant breaking rules Theron would hate. The first step, check the external network at a known weak point. Supposedly harmless, monitored, redundant, but the logs told another story. One slip, alarm scream, rules broken. Right or wrong didn't matter. Fingers hovered, heart thumped. Secrecy, raw, jagged, edge of the knife. Every keystroke a gamble, every ping a risk, every anomaly cataloged, breadcrumb to the mole, or disaster. Citadel enormous and empty, echoing my solitude. No aid, no backup. Just me, the data, the weight of the prince's rejection. System hiccuped, pulse jumped. Tiny lag, risk signal. Walking blind on a ledge, one wrong move, all alarms. But stopping, not an option. I'd seen the cracks, follow them I would. Outside the law, defying him. Yes, alone, absolutely. Resolve burned brighter than fear. Mission now. Truth to chase. Every careful keystroke a rebellion, a statement. I would find the mole, shadows or no shadows. I leaned closer to the console, network hum filling my ears. One step, one search, one connection. In, exposed, terrifyingly alone. Clarity, power, my first in hours. No turning back. I knew then I was completely done for. But what happened next? Worse. The desk was smaller than it looked, closer once Theron slid in opposite me, elbow almost grazing mine. Shouldn't have mattered. Shouldn't. But every nerve flared like a warning. "You've moved my files again," he said, calm, sharp enough to twist my stomach. "They were in the way," I shot back. "You're impossible." "I'm impossible." Hand hovered over pen like it might decide my fate. "Log's a mess. I need space." Space? Shared desk. Not breaking law prints. Fingers itched to push the folder closer. Almost touch. Almost. "You keep everything wrong," he said low. "Slows workflow. Slows me." "Maybe slow down then," I countered. Chair scraped. Too close. Heat from him. Subtle. Undeniable. Pressure through armrests shouldn't exist. "You're defiant." Eyes narrowing. Jaw tightening. Control wrestling something beneath. "I'm observant," I said, sharper than intended. Hand hovered near pen. Symbol, weapon, small act of war on a ridiculous battlefield. "You're pushing too far," he murmured. Distance vanished. Leaned toward me, neither yielding. "I'm not pushing," I said, heart hammering. "I'm making a point." Smirk. Tiny twitch, stomach clenched. "The point is, what exactly?" "That small things matter. Pens, folders, this desk. Even control," he countered. Tension pressed against chest. Fingers brushed. Ghost of touch. Both froze. Argument ended. Not resolved. Replaced by proximity. The desk, neutral before, now battlefield. Every move, every gesture, unspoken weight. Heat-radiated pen, chair, folder, tools of desire and defiance. I realized the war wasn't files or workflow. It was us. Pen forgotten, I leaned back. The argument had become addictive. Chess moves I could feel in my chest. Clever minds before, but this? Different. You're ignoring systemic implications, I said, trying to reclaim focus. Implications without context are useless, he said, edge beneath casual tone. A gauntlet thrown. Useless? I leaned closer. The structure depends on context. Remove one node and chaos spreads, he finished, measured calm that made my teeth itch. Yes, I know. Faint flare in his eyes betrayed thought process. Chest tight, sharp, thrilling, dangerous. Since the war, I've had to dumb down strategy for most colleagues, I said, pride slipping. Finally, someone who keeps up. Smirk, twitch at corner of mouth, breath caught. Keep up or lead? Difference matters here. Click. Minds colliding, heart argued, brain entranced, thrill unwelcome, but undeniable. Conversation twisted, sentences became blades, arguments dark dance. Corrections, counterpoints, posture, leaning, pushing, chasing, sparring, and intellect. Danger wasn't politics, not the mole, not Citadel. It was this. A man who could match me, blow for blow, mind for mind. Debate ended, charged silence, eyes met, antagonism was armor, truth beneath, dangerous, thrilling. I'd met my match, loved and hated every second. I knew then I was completely done for. But what happened next, worse. I froze when he stepped closer. Not normal assertion. Too close. Inches. Line of sight. Shoulder brushed mine. Brain short-circuited. Step back, I said, voice sharper than intended. He didn't. Tilted head, eyes calculating, corner of smirk teased tension. You first, murmured. Challenge I couldn't ignore. Heat pooled, rigid pull, quiet weight, pressing against reflexes, pulse hammering, danger and magnetic charge tangled. I'm not moving, I snapped, reclaiming authority. Good luck, brain whispered. Every instinct wanted shift, slight, to feel the brush. I didn't. Shoulders squared, gaze locked. He pressed closer. Silent test. Hand twitched near desk edge. Fist not made. Tension wasn't desk, documents, argument. It was us. Physical, immediate, agonizing. Measured fractions, shoulder, chest, heat radiating like warning and thrill. Electric. Mind calculating escape, body ignoring, holding firm. Still think you can win verbally? Low, teasing, dangerous. I don't need to win. I just refuse to lose. Amused? Irritated? Couldn't tell. Uncertainty maddening. Heat, pressure, nearness, battlefield unprepared for. Beat stretched impossibly, chest pressed forward. Presence overwhelming. I didn't flinch. Holding firm, he did too. Moment neither could own or release. Seconds dense with unspoken energy. Adrenaline, heat, challenge, vice-like, addictive. Not desire. Not him. Tension. Alive. Somewhere in the charged air I knew, completely undone. Sweet quiet, door clicked, alone, or so I thought. Even empty, he lingered, muscles, pulse, heat, memory, hate myself. Every nerve, adrenaline, betrayed me. Body responded wrong, blood rushing, chest tight, unwelcome awareness. Should be analyzing threats, confirming anomalies. Instead, replaying space between us, brush of him, nearness, shock of pleasure. Closed eyes. Logic mantra. He's the enemy. Mission. Cannot feel this. Skin stubborn. Thrill wasn't rational or tactical, humiliatingly personal. Imagined him a statue. Perfect lines, frozen posture, untouchable. Observation not desire. Cold. Harmless. Safe. Mental distance faltered. Shiver. Ghost heat. Remembered touch. Should scream. Should dismantle him. Instead, cataloged fascination. Self-betrayal stung worse than any Citadel threat. Mind dissected, exposed, analyzed. Body declared desire. Horror, raw, confused heat, shaking. Swallowed hard. Vow statue, nothing more. Cold, unmoon beautiful, dangerous, untouchable. If desire slipped further, lost. Not to him yet, not to self. Citadel couldn't afford that. I couldn't. Breathing shallow. Statue fixed in mind. Thrill lodged, louder with each denial. Supposed to hate, supposed to dismantle. Body betrayed. Duration unknown. And that, more than any external threat, terrified me. I arrived at the Citadel's grand ballroom, feeling like I'd stepped straight into someone else's fantasy. Gold spilling from chandeliers, polished floors you could fall into, servants drifting around with crystal flutes like they were part of the decor. Nobles shimmered in colors violent enough to make my eyes squint. But I wasn't here to admire any of it. I was here to watch. Serafina. I saw her before the room fully settled around me. Standing off to the side, posture carved from discipline, smile soft but rehearsed, eyes skimming every detail without ever appearing to move. Nothing about her shouted danger. She was worse than that. Overlooked, trusted, comfortable. a shadow wearing silk. I watched her glide from group to group, sliding into conversations with just the right level of warmth. Too smooth, too graceful, too aware. And then her gaze caught mine. Not the polite flicker you give a stranger, no. She tilted her head just enough to let me know she recognized something in me she shouldn't have access to. A gesture meant to settle under my skin. It did. Her fingers brushed at the hem of her gown, a tiny, meaningless motion, but familiar in a way that made my stomach knot. Something I would do. Something she shouldn't know. It felt like she'd been studying me behind a one-way mirror. I couldn't look away. The way she held her shoulders, the exact beat she lingered near certain nobles, the slightly too smooth drift through the crowd, it all whispered, "Pay attention." Not a warning, a taunt. And the realization slid cold and unwelcome down my spine. She was a confidante, someone people relied on, leaned toward, trusted more than they should. Theron trusted her, maybe more than trusted. That alone made her dangerous. I tracked every flick of her gaze, every calculated step. She wasn't mingling, she was mapping. Territory, alliances, pressure points. And the knot in my chest tightened. Then she moved toward me. Her smile warmed, her head dipped, and she extended her hand, not formally, but a feather-light brush of fingers that lingered just long enough to register. My face stayed neutral. My mind recoiled. It was deliberate, a test, and I reacted like she expected, hyper-aware, cautious, unsettled. Serafina was the quiet threat I hadn't factored in, not loud, not obvious, just present, everywhere, all at once. I straightened, letting my spine do the work while my insides cataloged every micro-expression she offered. Eyes lingering half a second too long, a finger tapping her glass, a smile that vanished before it reached her eyes. Every gesture a breadcrumb, every movement a silent message. This wasn't a ball anymore, it was a battlefield. And she was already in position. I curled my hands inside my gloves, focus, analyze, observe. Because the moment I let curiosity slip into something messier, I'd lose ground. And tonight, there was no ground to spare. Nothing about this night would be ordinary. I knew that before the first violin even struck its note. The music began, soft, velvet-edged, gliding into the air like it owned the room. Then it swelled, and suddenly I was part of it whether I liked it or not. Theron's hand closed around mine, steady and unyielding, a silent command dressed up as civility. And just like that, we were dancing. Every step was politics. Every shift of weight, every angle of his jaw, every brush of breath was a negotiation. Enough ease to convince the watchers we were comfortable. Enough distance to avoid the wrong kind of whisper. Smile, but not too much. Hold, but not too tight. The nobles watched like hawks, eyes sharp behind polite interest, analyzing every millimeter between us. Theron's hand tightened around mine. A reminder, not a reprimand. His posture was perfect, effortless, but underneath it I felt the strain. I wasn't an experienced partner for him, not in this context, and my tension could break the illusion. The pressure was a live wire, humming beneath my skin. It wasn't fear. Fear would have been easy. It was the thrill of being one misstep away from disaster. Addictive, in a sick way. I forced myself to breathe, block out the heat creeping up my neck, ignore how close he was. Don't think about earlier moments I hadn't fully escaped from. Just execute. Analyze. Perform. Elara Vanya, flawless, or at least believable. I corrected a turn with a flick of my wrist. A cluster of diplomats noticed immediately, shoulders straightening, eyes narrowing. They were studying us, judging us, calculating the implications of every synchronized movement. My chest tightened. One error and rumors would bloom before the music stopped. Theron leaned closer. Not intimate, just anchoring me. His presence sharpened my focus, kept me tethered to the performance instead of the noise inside my own head. This wasn't a dance. It was survival by choreography. Then I saw them, a small group of diplomats off to the side, whispering as they tracked us. Hands folded, eyes cold, expressions too intent to be casual. They were testing us. Testing me. If we slipped, it wouldn't be a social embarrassment. It would be political fallout, quiet but lethal. I stayed in rhythm, even as my mind spun through possible outcomes, potential rumors, diplomatic landmines. Theron's hand slid along my back with mechanical precision, and I hated how easily my body matched the movement. When the final note rang out, I was shaking inside my skin. Sweat collected at my spine, my lungs trying to catch up. We'd given them a perfect show, or close enough to survive. But I knew what it had cost. I stepped back, heart pounding, the applause washing over me without landing. The scrutiny didn't lift, it settled deeper. And I knew, this was just the first test. The next one would be worse. I looked at Theron. His mask was flawless, unreadable, and something in me twisted. Respect, fear, desire tangled together in a knot I didn't have the tools to undo. The war of appearances had officially begun. The music shifted again, lighter this time, coaxing the room into motion. Theron's hand found mine with infuriating ease, guiding me into the next pattern. And I followed. Instantly, too easily. My body betrayed me in the first step. Everything he initiated, every pivot, every subtle shift, every breath that hinted at direction, my limbs responded to before I could think. I knew this dance. I'd practiced it. But this wasn't practice. This was instinct taking over. It should have felt controlled, professional. But instead it hit me like a pulse of electricity, sharp, synchronizing, undeniable. We moved like two pieces cut from the same design. His arm slid into place around mine, my body adjusted on reflex. Our cadence synced without effort. And the more it happened, the more it terrified me. He leaned in, not enough to start whispers, just enough that I felt the weight of him, the gravity. My spine straightened, my breath hitched. Every part of me became hyper-aware of every part of him. This wasn't performance anymore. It was something rawer, threaded beneath the surface. Every step was a fight for control I was losing. My mind shouted independence. My body responded to him like it had already made its choice. It made me furious. I wanted to chalk it up to training or adrenaline or muscle memory. But the truth burned quietly in my chest. He was leading, and I was letting him. Worse, following him felt inevitable. The final chord approached. I forced my posture into perfection, pasted on the diplomatic smile, held my chin high, but it didn't matter. I felt the truth in every joint, every muscle. He could lead me anywhere. When the music stopped, we froze in place, suspended in a tension thick enough to cut. The applause rolled in again, oblivious, but all I felt was the heat between us, the echo of our sync, and the sting of losing control. I stepped back, breath shaky, trying to reclaim autonomy. But it was too late. The damage was done. The coordination wasn't skill. It was a weapon. And tonight, it had hit its mark. The ballroom blurred, all sound flattening into background noise. The applause, the chatter, the perfume hanging too heavily in the air, I barely registered any of it. All I could feel was him, Theron, the way his hand had held mine, the precision of our steps, the heat that still burned under my skin. And worse, the look he gave me when the music ended. Not the prince, not the strategist. Him, too raw, too knowing. My chest tightened instantly. Heat crawled up my neck. I hated that my body responded faster than my thoughts. I told myself to get a grip, to think, to detach, but nothing obeyed. The truth hit with brutal clarity, desire. Not admiration, not fear, not some passing flicker of adrenaline. Desire, sharp and inconvenient and absolutely forbidden. It didn't matter that my mission depended on distance. It didn't matter that he was a threat I needed to neutralize. It didn't matter that getting close to him was the fastest route to disaster. My body didn't care. My pulse didn't care. And my mind, traitorous thing that it was, cataloged every detail like it wanted to remember. I tried to step away, force space between thought and temptation, but the realization was already lodged in me, deep, permanent. It wasn't going to fade with air or time or reason. He wasn't just dangerous. He was the exact flavor of danger my bones leaned toward. And that was the real catastrophe. The dance wasn't bait on his part. It was bait on mine. I had walked into it thinking I was immune, above it, smarter, and then one glance undid every barrier I'd built. I was compromised completely. And the worst part, I didn't want out. I didn't just want him. I was already tangled in something that would devour me if I let it. And I knew. This was only the beginning. The room was dark, suffocatingly so, but I felt him long before I reached for the lamp. His scent, cedar layered over something cold, sterile-controlled, hung in the corners. His side of the bed was pristine, sheets tucked with military severity. Mine was a mess. Fitting. I stayed on my edge, rigid, trying to shake off the ghost of the dance. But it clung to me. The memory of his hands, the way he guided me without asking, the way my body listened to him like it had never listened to me. I stared at the ceiling, tracing shadows like they held answers. Break it down, Elara. Analyze it. Neutralize it. But my mind kept betraying me with flashes of movement, his palm on my back, his breath near my ear, the perfect sync of our steps. A weapon I hadn't seen coming. The silence pressed in. No breath from him, no shift, just the steady tick of the clock marking the longest night of my life. I pulled the blankets closer, inching farther from the untouched half of the bed. The space between us felt like a fault line, quiet, waiting to split open. This room used to feel neutral. Now it felt like the aftermath of a battle I hadn't prepared for. A battle I'd lost. And tomorrow, I'd have to pretend none of it had touched me. But lying there, cold and furious and aching, I knew the truth. I wasn't in control anymore. Not of my body, not of my reactions, not of this. Tonight, the enemy wasn't him. It was me. The next morning detonated before I even opened my eyes. I was still tangled in blankets, half-dressed, brain barely rebooting when my datapad started vibrating like it was trying to escape the nightstand. I grabbed it, expecting some routine Citadel update. Then I saw the headline, "Confidential Aegis diplomatic cables leaked, sensitive negotiations publicly exposed." My stomach bottomed out. This wasn't an accident. The details were too precise, too clean. Someone with access, someone on the inside, someone who knew exactly what to hit. And for one terrible second, I felt vindication. Cold, sharp, ugly. I'd been right. I wasn't paranoid. But that flicker died fast, because the leak wasn't embarrassing. It was catastrophic. Entire negotiations compromised, alliances destabilized, trust shattered. This wasn't a stumble. This was an attack. I shot upright, nearly flinging the datapad across the room. My mind snapped into crisis mode instantly, racing ahead of me. Fallout projections, diplomatic retaliation, public reactions, the dozens of ways this could spiral into violence if we didn't contain it. Theron flashed through my mind, jaw tight, hands clenched, that subtle tremor he tried to hide whenever the world slipped out of his control. I hated that I could picture him so clearly. I hated how instantly he became part of the calculus. I scanned the cables again, each line cut deeper. Secrets that had lived only in secured rooms now plastered in public feeds. Someone wanted to watch the world burn. My pulse rocketed. Ice crawled through my chest. I sent an encrypted alert to my team, my mind already dissecting likely motives, probable culprits, the fastest triage measures. We were losing before we'd even begun. And somewhere beneath the urgency, something colder settled in my gut. This wasn't just a crisis. It was a declaration. And I was already in too deep to pretend otherwise. The morning moved faster than I could track. By the time I reached the Citadel's council chamber, the whole place was vibrating with panic. Courtiers flitted around like startled birds, whispers ricocheting off the stone walls. Screens flashed warning sigils. Aides rushed past, clutching datapads with shaking hands. Everyone here smelled what I did. Catastrophe breathing down our necks. And there was Theron, standing dead center, carved from cold resolve. He wasn't panicking. He moved like a man holding a lit fuse and pretending it wasn't burning down. His shoulders were locked, his jaw clenched tight enough to crack. That alone told me more than every frantic whisper around us. Serafina, his confidant, his shadow, the Minister of Communications, cut through the chaos with her usual unsettling calm. She leaned in close, murmured something meant for no other ears. Too intimate, too practiced. Theron's reply was a single, clipped nod as he scanned the room like he was counting potential traitors. To everyone else, it was nothing. To me, it was a flare. Internal wheels were already turning. I swallowed a breath and forced my spine into stillness. Let the room panic. I stayed still, letting every whisper, every skittish movement map itself into threat metrics in my head. My fingers itched for schematics, old habits, but I kept them still. Observation first. Always. The council was about to begin, and the tension pressed against my ribs like a physical weight. Theron's gaze swept over the chamber. Sharp, predatory, calculating. My pulse synced to it, low and steady. Every choice he made today would cascade through the Citadel like falling dominoes. And there it was, that familiar flicker of detachment sliding into place. The part of me trained to watch without giving myself away. I tracked the patterns beneath the panic. Who was genuinely afraid? Who was performing? Who was quietly shaping the chaos for their own gain? Serafina returned to Theron, tight-lipped, eyes sharp. Another invisible exchange, another reminder that I was outside the circle, reading shadows while they traded secrets. My stomach tightened. I held my posture. Perfect calm, perfect observation. Underneath it, my mind raced. The court could panic. I saw the storm before it broke. The door to the private suite closed with a finality that knotted my stomach. Theron was already there, rigid, carved from shadow, eyes cutting into me with surgical precision. He didn't just look, he dissected. I felt the accusation before he opened his mouth. Explain. One word. Cold. Absolute. I straightened, letting irritation skim the surface of my voice. Explain what? The leak, he said, stepping closer. The cable that was supposed to stay sealed. I want to know how it reached the press, and why I should still trust your kingdom. No warmth, no doubt, just the accusation laid bare. My pulse jumped. The room felt like an intellectual firing range, and I just stepped into the line of fire. You think we did this? I asked, disbelief sharpening my tone. That I, or anyone from Veritas, would torch our own protocols? He didn't even blink. I think ignoring the possibility would be foolish. The timing, the patterns. You were positioned perfectly to manipulate this. Your kingdom has subtle methods. You've used them before. Anger flared, quick and hot. Manipulate? The word tasted like insult. I built the systems that prevent exactly this, and every analysis I've run has been transparent. You're accusing us on suspicion and bias. Conjecture, he corrected softly, with facts that suggest otherwise. The facts, I cut in, cold enough to frost stone, are mine, and they point away from us. You have assumption, not evidence, and that assumption is dangerous. His eyes narrowed, his voice dropped. I trust facts over loyalty, and your allegiance has shifted before. Heat surged under my skin. Not fear, not quite, but the sharp edge of outrage. My allegiance is to the Citadel's safety. If you think Veritas did this, you're reading everything wrong. He stepped closer, air tightening between us. Then prove it, he murmured. Convince me, or I treat your kingdom as complicit. I forced a slow breath, centering the calm he couldn't shake. I will, I said quietly. And when I do, you'll see the truth. Real truth, not suspicion. And it won't lead back to us. His gaze locked with mine, unblinking. The silence burned, and for the first time I realized he wasn't bluffing. He truly believed I could be the enemy. That made this moment dangerous in a way no weapon ever could. I didn't argue. I brought proof. I slid the report onto the table, the one I'd pieced together in the small hours after the leak. Clean, precise, undeniable. My pulse beat with quiet vindication. Here, I said, tapping the diagram. The breach didn't come from outside. It came from here. A node buried deep in Aegis's internal network, only accessible to someone on the inside. That's someone with clearance. Theron leaned in, eyes scanning every line with rigid focus. Each timestamp, each anomaly, each data path, tiny knives of truth he couldn't avoid. So you're saying it's internal, he muttered, almost to himself. Exactly. Your external defenses worked. The problem is someone who already has the keys. My voice stayed even, clinical. Inside, outrage and relief tangled like live wires. And you're certain? He asked. I met his gaze. Certain enough that suspecting Veritas is not only wrong, it's reckless. Every detail points inward. This breach came from someone with your level of clearance or higher. He drummed his fingers once, sharp, impatient. The silence that followed wasn't dismissive, it was calculation. Then something shifted, just a flicker. Not trust, never that, but recognition. He saw it. He saw me. A quiet, thin smile tugged inside me, pride, bright and fierce. I'll review this, he said at last, voice too controlled. It's compelling. I nodded, masking the rush that hit me. The victory wasn't loud. It was surgical, exact, and mine. When he picked up the report, everything tightened. He flipped through the pages slowly, too slow, as if speed would admit defeat. I watched the microshifts, the stiffening of his shoulders, the flicker behind his eyes, the jaw that locked like he was swallowing a curse. You've covered every angle, he said finally, clipped and reluctant. I didn't smile, not outwardly. I traced the breach to the exact internal node, the timestamps align, the access logs align. It wasn't us. He looked up for a heartbeat, just long enough for frustration to flash through the cracks of his composure. Then he buried it again, rigid as stone. I let him sit in it, watched every microscopic reaction, every quiet concession. You've made a compelling case, he managed, each word a controlled exhale. He gave a small nod, tiny, formal, but real. Inside, triumph lit like fire. Dangerous fire. Holding that kind of intellectual leverage over Theron wasn't safe. It wasn't simple. It was a razor pressed between pride and peril. I didn't show it. I couldn't. But gods, I felt it. It hit me before he spoke. He wasn't just absorbing the evidence. He was staring down the consequences. I leaned forward, voice steady, cutting through the static. We can debate guilt forever, but that won't stop the next breach. The Citadel isn't a palace, it's a powder keg. One missed cue and millions die. His eyes snapped up, cold and sharp. I didn't give him space to misread me. Either we work together, I said, or everything collapses. That's math, not politics. His grip tightened on the table. Silence stretched, heavy, electric. You're too smart to let ego cause a catastrophe, I added quietly. And so am I. Another beat, another calculation. Finally, he inhaled. Logic isn't a matter of opinion, thus he said. Neither is necessity. Exactly. The air between us felt charged enough to spark. The shift came in a breath. Theron's shoulders eased by a fraction, so small most people wouldn't notice. But I did. He'd reached the same conclusion I had. Survival demanded partnership. Fine, he said. We work together. Strictly professional. This ends when the mole is exposed. No favors. No alliances beyond necessity. Agreed. The words sealed something sharp and fragile between us. A truce edged in steel. His eyes grazed mine, just for a moment, and something flickered. Respect, maybe. Something darker, maybe. Then it vanished behind his mask. I watched him gather the papers, movements precise, composed. Necessary alliance? Yes. Safe alliance? No. Working with him was the only path forward. It was also the most dangerous one. And the second I accepted that, the line between us shifted. There was no going back. That night, after the truce was finally hammered into place, we sat across from each other long enough that the silence stopped being neutral and started feeling like a pressure plate. One wrong word and the whole thing would blow. I broke first. We need rules, I said. Not a plea, not a threat, just a fact I wasn't interested in dressing up. Theron didn't flinch. He leaned back, fingers steepled like he'd already predicted my opening move 3 steps ago. Rules, he echoed, dry as dust. Fine. Define them. I laid out the first one. Nightly meetings. Same hour, same room, no exceptions, no witnesses. We both knew the hour wasn't chosen for convenience. It was for invisibility. The royal suite kept out spies. It did nothing about the person sitting across the table. Next, coded language. Everything, reports, questions, stray remarks, had to be wrapped in enough ambiguity that even if someone overheard us, they'd need a cryptographer and divine intervention to make sense of it. I watched him calculating, already running simulations of how the court's eavesdroppers would try to split our words apart. Then document handling. Nothing digital unless it was triple locked. Nothing physical left out, even for a breath. Every file accounted for, every page present. If one of us vanished for 5 minutes, the other assumed compromise. It felt less like policy and more like combat doctrine. Clean, dangerous, and honestly a little exhilarating. And then the boundaries. No personal questions, no detours, no wandering into anything that wasn't mission critical. Easy to say, strangely intimate to agree to. The air thinned every time our hands brushed over a shared folder. By the time we'd carved the last rule into place, the alliance was real. Professional, calculated, and unnervingly fragile. We weren't enemies at a ballroom anymore. We were partners, with the unsettling awareness that a single misstep could turn the whole thing into wreckage. And still, when I looked at him, the rogue thought hit before I could stop it. I was actually looking forward to this. Working with the man I'd been ready to dismantle yesterday. Necessary, dangerous, and already unsettling in ways I didn't want to name. The first covert meeting was set, and I already knew the rules wouldn't be the hardest part. Working with Theron would be unlike anything I'd done before. And that was the problem. I waited for the corridor to empty before slipping into the royal suite. The door clicked shut behind me, soft but final, and suddenly the world shrank to the space between us. The room smelled faintly of cedar polish and his cologne, subtle but enough to snag my breath. He was already at the window, arms crossed, his silhouette carved against the city lights. He didn't speak. He never did at the beginning. That silence of his was a weapon. Quiet, heavy, unsettling. It pressed against my ribs like a warning. I set the files down. Let's start, I said, aiming for steady. My fingers had other plans, faintly shaking. He nodded once and slid a chair out. When I sat, our knees brushed under the table. Accidental, brief, but enough to make my pulse spike like I'd stepped off a precipice. I reminded myself. Professional, nothing else. We worked through dossiers and intercepted comms. Paper rustling, pen scratching, both of us leaning closer and pretending that didn't affect anything. Every time he bent over a page, I caught the tension in his jaw, the way he forced steadiness. I realized I mirrored it. Once, we reached for the same file. Our hands collided, quick, warm, jarring, and I recoiled like the folder had burned me. He hesitated for a fraction of a heartbeat before pulling back. My pulse didn't slow for a long time. By the end of the hour, we'd exchanged maybe 10 words, and somehow it felt like we'd said too much. I gathered my notes carefully, keeping every movement precise. I left the last file at the table's edge, inches from where he'd been sitting. When I closed the door behind me, the quiet clung to my skin. That first hour wasn't just a briefing, it was a warning. And deep down, I already knew I wasn't going to obey it. I sat across from him again, pretending nothing about last night lingered. The suite was dim, just a desk lamp casting a pool of warm light across maps and holo displays. Theron was already in motion, unfolding data streams with the kind of fluid precision that made my chest tighten in a way I deeply wanted to ignore. At first, I kept mental distance. I didn't like how easily he dominated the space, how he seemed to bend logic into place with his bare hands. Then I started paying attention, really paying attention. The way he cross-referenced encrypted comms with internal logs, the way he spotted inconsistencies I would have overlooked even on my best day. No theatrics. No ego, just clean, surgical thought. He paused at my notes, studying them with sharp, analytical interest instead of suspicion. His eyes flicked over my handwriting, assessing, comparing. Our gazes met for a second. No challenge, no threat, just acknowledgement. Mutual competence. The simple, dangerous truth that we were better together. A dangerous kind of respect flickered awake. Quiet, but undeniable. Not attraction. Not yet. Something deeper. Something that whispered, "This is someone who can keep up with you." I shoved the thought aside, but it stayed. I pretended to refocus on my notes. My eyes kept drifting back. His kept drifting too, tracking me in that same measured, calculating way. The intellectual chemistry between us sparked louder than we spoke. I told myself it was only professional. Logic. Efficiency. But logic had never felt electric before. The doors to the restricted library shut with a soft click that echoed like a closing vault. The air was heavier here. Dust, ink, age, knowledge that had been hidden on purpose. Theron moved first, slipping through the towering shelves like the space recognized him. I followed, pulse quickening. This wasn't a library. This was a cathedral of secrets, treaties, histories, the kind of information that kept empires alive, or tore them apart. And the two of us were trespassing through it together. I tried focusing on the task. Harder than it should have been, with him brushing past my shoulder, the soft rustle of his coat, the steady breaths as he skimmed manuscripts older than the Citadel itself. We ghosted through rows of forbidden knowledge, exchanging quick glances that were all calculation but carried something quieter underneath. Proximity. Quiet synchrony. Awareness neither of us had volunteered for. The sheer scale of it was dizzying. Vaulted ceilings, shelves climbing stories high, gilded bindings, scrolls and forgotten tongues. This place breathed history, and walking through it with him felt charged. He pulled a slim leather volume free and held it out to me. Our fingers brushed, brief but sharp enough to jolt through me. Everything here amplified the smallest things. The space, the secrecy, the danger. Too intimate for two people who weren't supposed to trust each other. We went deeper. Footsteps muffled by thick carpets, the smell of old parchment curling around us. I traced titles with reverence. And every few seconds I felt him moving near, purposeful and focused in a way that made something inside me tighten. This place made us equals, partners. And the closeness of that, mental, physical, unspoken, was more dangerous than anything in these archives. The far section smelled of mildew and old leather, stacks leaning like they were exhausted from holding centuries upright. I skimmed my fingers along the spines, careful, then something caught my eye. A small wooden box. Half hidden, wedged between two oversized tomes, rough, worn, nothing like the official containers we'd handled all night. It felt personal. The kind of object someone hides, not files away. I pulled it free. Dust rose in a soft cloud. The wood was warm, heavy, familiar in that way old things sometimes are. I held it, thumb tracing the worn edges, almost reverent. Theron was close behind me. I didn't have to look to know. Every nerve recognized his presence before my mind did. Then the library door creaked. Quiet, but in the thick silence, it might as well have been a shout. My pulse jumped. I froze, gripping the box tighter. Footsteps followed, slow, deliberate. Someone was coming. The box suddenly felt like contraband and confession all at once. Important. Too important. The footsteps grew louder. I held the relic closer to my chest and waited for the danger to step out of the shadows. I didn't hear him approach until his boots echoed on the stone, measured, unhurried, unmistakable. I tightened my grip on the box as if it could anchor me. Vanya? Just my name. Sharper than a reprimand. The air thinned. Theron, I said, forcing calm. I found this. It's part of the historical survey. I thought it might be. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The tilt of his head said everything. His eyes landed on the box with a precision that made my stomach drop. This wasn't about the mission. It was about him. Put it down, he said, voice tight and owned to a blade. I hesitated. Just a second. The box radiated significance. It pulled at me, but the tension rolling off him made my fingers loosen. I set it on the table carefully. The scrape of wood against stone felt too loud. I didn't mean to cross, I started. His silence cut sharper than any interruption. Not anger, containment. The kind that takes more strength than fury ever will. I'd touched something I wasn't meant to see, and he wouldn't forgive that lightly. Understood, I finally said, quiet. He dipped his head once, and the room seemed to exhale. I didn't expect him to speak again. That silence felt like a wall meant to stay standing. It belonged to her, he said eventually, voice thin and controlled. I looked up sharply. He didn't look at me, just the box. My sister, he added. She was gone before anyone realized she was missing. His jaw tightened. That box, it was the last thing she touched, the only piece of her left. The world stilled. Grief like that changes the air. You kept it hidden, I said quietly. He nodded once. No one knows, not my counsel, not the court, no one. A faint crack in his voice, and now it's been exposed. I didn't know, I whispered. I know, he said, which is why I'm still standing here, but it doesn't undo the breach. The box sat between us, heavy with memory and pain. And something shifted, subtle, deep, irreversible. Not trust, not forgiveness, just awareness, understanding, the quiet truth of the man beneath the armor. Thank you, I said, because anything more would have been intrusion. He inclined his head, slow, strained, and the silence settled again, dense with everything said and everything neither of us could say. I stayed still long after he set the relic back where it belonged, trying not to breathe too loudly, trying not to think too loudly either. But my mind refused to quiet down. I'd always filed him under cold, precise, untouchable, the kind of man who lets politics make his choices long before emotion gets a vote. And now, that mask had cracked, just enough for me to glimpse the raw steel trembling underneath. He buries it so deep, I realized. Every rigid angle of his posture, every clipped word, every pause that feels like it hurts him to take, it's all scaffolding. Not arrogance, not entitlement, just grief, unrelenting, merciless grief. A fortress built around the absence of someone he loved, someone he couldn't save. I could feel the pattern forming, like I was sketching him out in my head. Early trauma, the pressure of command, the hollow his sister left behind, and the control. My God, the control. It wasn't discipline, it was survival. Every meticulous habit, every measured glance, every strategic smile, tools to keep himself from falling apart. And the irony, because of course there was irony, the more polished the facade, the louder it screamed about what it was hiding. I could almost picture him alone at night, pacing empty palace halls, jaw clenched, thumb brushing that relic he never lets anyone touch. The image made my chest tighten, not in longing, not in anything I dare call affection, but in reluctant understanding. How heavy must it feel to carry a loss that big without letting a single crack show? How exhausting to live under the strain of being seen as something you're not, while desperately keeping every shard of yourself in place. I'd spent years analyzing data, breaking down plots, predicting political moves. But this was human calculus, and it was brutal. A fortress of grief wrapped in iron, layered with strategy, polished until it gleamed. And suddenly, all the contempt I'd held for his coldness felt misplaced. It wasn't pride or cruelty. It was grief sharpened into control. It made me wary, yes, but also fascinated. He isn't untouchable because he's above everyone. He's untouchable because touching him would shatter something vital inside him, and maybe inside me too if I let it. And I couldn't stop thinking about it. Not because I wanted to, not because I liked him, but because the truth about him demanded attention. Every judgment I'd made about him felt shallow. I'd underestimated what it takes to stand upright when your soul has already cracked. I shook my head, but I knew the thought wouldn't leave me. Understanding him was dangerous. Understanding him this well, that was the real risk of this alliance. I caught it the second it happened, and my stomach dropped like a stone. Serafina, wrapped in her usual cloak of polished indifference, intercepted a folded note meant for my diplomatic staff. Just a memo on the surface, harmless enough. But the timing, the way her fingers lingered before she slipped it into her sleeve, that was deliberate. Surgical. Everyone else stayed blissfully oblivious, laughing, nodding, playing their parts in the court's endless performance. But I saw, and I knew. This wasn't curiosity or accident or petty spying. This was a move. A warning. A message from someone who decided I was the target. I tried to catch Theron's eye, a tiny flicker of a signal, subtle enough to stay invisible to everyone else. But he didn't see it. His attention was locked on the ambassador across the hall, jaw tense as always, completely unaware of the little storm gathering just beyond his line of sight. My pulse hammered. I couldn't gesture again without drawing attention. My fingers tightened around my notes. My mind ran the numbers. Who else had noticed? Could Serafina act faster than me? How far ahead was she, and how much damage had already been done? It infuriated me, watching her glide through the room like she owned every shadow, knowing she was already building her next move while everyone else stayed wrapped in their comfortable ignorance. The elegant chatter, the polite clapping. It all felt like a stage built to hide the knife pressed against my ribs. I realized then that I was the only one who saw her, the only one who understood what she'd set in motion, and the only one who had to act. Theron's obliviousness cut sharper than usual. I'd forced this alliance, torn down walls to reach him, and now another enemy, quieter, sharper, was already rewriting the board under our feet. One wrong move, and the investigation, the pact, and the threadbare trust we'd built would snap. I steadied my breath, forcing the panic down like poison. One thing was clear. Serafina had made her move, and I was the board she wanted to play on. I just had to stay ahead of her. I felt it the second he stepped into the dim study, the air tightening like something bracing to snap. Theron didn't speak. He held a folded piece of paper between his fingers, edges crisp, expression unreadable. But I knew what it was the moment I saw the faint watermark, a cipher key, one tied to Veritas, one I'd never seen before. My stomach flipped. I wasn't lying. I had nothing to do with it, but the sight of it in his hand made my throat go dry. This wasn't a clue. It was a trap, and Serafina had thrown it right at our feet. I tried, but the words stumbled out, thin and useless. He didn't move, didn't blink, just waited, silently demanding that I find an explanation he already doubted. I stepped closer. I swear I didn't. This isn't mine. I haven't touched anything like it. My hands lifted on instinct, palms open in a gesture I hated for how vulnerable it made me feel. Not to the court, not to Serafina, to him. He didn't look away. His mask didn't slip. But something flickered underneath. Doubt, calculation, a temptation to believe the worst. Then explain it, he said at last, calm and flat. No accusation, just expectation. Somehow that was worse. I swallowed. I couldn't accuse Serafina without proof, and all I had was instinct, loud, insistent instinct. My mind raced. Could I find the flaw before he jumped to the wrong conclusion? Could I prove my innocence without tipping my hand? I studied the key, tracing each mark, each loop. Too precise, too deliberate, and branded with my kingdom's insignia. It was damning even when it wasn't true. Theron's silence pressed down on me, heavy and relentless. One misstep, and everything we'd built would fracture. He didn't trust me, not fully, and this was exactly the kind of poison designed to widen that gap. I leaned in, lowering my voice. Theron, you have to trust me. This isn't mine. Someone wants us to believe it is. He didn't move, didn't answer, just held the key between us like a blade. And suddenly, it hit me with terrifying clarity. The threat wasn't just Serafina anymore. The threat was me, in his eyes. He stepped back, and the whole room shifted with him. One moment we were side by side, locked into the same rhythm, fighting toward the same goal. The next, the cipher key rewired him. His eyes hardened, the warmth I'd glimpsed earlier gone like it had never existed. He retreated to his desk without a glance, the soft scrape of the chair sounding louder than any slammed door. My pulse jumped. I wanted to reach out, to pull him back, but the rigid line of his shoulders made it pointless. We can figure this out together, I tried. It came out uneven. He didn't react, just slid the key across the desk in a clean, dismissive motion and sat down, face unreadable. And just like that, he was the public prince again, cold, flawless, unreachable. Not Theron, my reluctant co-conspirator, but a man ruled by evidence even when the evidence was a lie. It hit like a physical strike, the sudden distance. The collapse of all the small, fragile things we'd built, the quiet moments, the shared silences, the accidental brush of hands. Gone, shuttered, shut down. I tried again, softer. Theron, look at me, please. Nothing. The silence that answered was colder than any accusation. The files between us felt like ruins. The investigation stalled, yes, but the deeper damage was the fracture between us. And I couldn't reach him, not like this. I sat there, watching the man I'd begun to respect, maybe more than that, fold himself back behind iron walls, and there was nothing I could do. The night ended in quiet devastation. No breakthroughs, no trust rebuilt, just the familiar ache of two people retreating from each other at the moment they needed closeness most. I couldn't sit there and watch him retreat behind that perfect mask, not when the stakes were climbing by the minute, not when everything we'd built was dangling by a thread. Theron, I said sharply enough to cut through his silence. He didn't look up, so I stepped into his space, forcing the issue. This cold wall you're putting up, it ends now. His eyes flicked toward me, guarded, ready to bolt behind strategy and composure. I didn't let him. You're letting one planted key dictate everything? Dictate us? I pushed. Is your system really that weak? His jaw tightened. Good. At least he was listening. We have a pact, I said, voice steady, even though I could feel the tension buzzing under my skin. You agreed to it. That means we move together. Stop. One false lead doesn't get to tear this apart. He drew a slow breath, his posture shifting just a little, enough to tell me I'd cracked through something. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't restored trust, but it was something. I'm not asking for loyalty to me, I said quietly. I'm asking for competence, for the pact, for the investigation, for both of us. Another breath, another small shift. He wasn't leaving, he wasn't closing the door completely. And for now, that was survival. My chest still ached from the distance he'd pulled between us, from the raw edges of everything we weren't saying, but I knew we'd weathered this hit. Barely. We're not done here, Theron, I said, meeting his gaze head on. Not until we see this through, together. He didn't answer, but the weight of his presence tilted back toward me, inch by inch. And for tonight, that was enough. I should have been furious. Part of me was. The key sat between us like a taunt, real, validated, and maliciously engineered to grind us to a halt. Theron set it down almost reverently, as if it were some relic dredged up from a forgotten war. It's real, he said, voice clipped. Not accusatory, not emotional, just grim. I leaned over the symbols etched into the surface. My fingers tingled with a mix of dread and curiosity. But it's impossible, Theron went on, staring at the key like it offended him personally. Recursive substitution, temporal displacement, polyalphabetic rotation tied to lunar cycles. No one could decipher it without... He stopped. His gaze slid to me. The implication hung between us. Without someone from Veritas, he finished quietly. I froze. That meant me, my kingdom, my heritage wrapped inside an impossible code. The air felt heavier, edges sharper. He wasn't doubting me. He wasn't blaming me. He was calculating. And he'd reached the only viable conclusion. This was mine to solve. My pulse spiked, not with fear, but with that bright electric tug I always felt when faced with a puzzle meant to break lesser minds. The key wasn't just a trap, it was a challenge, and it was calling to me. So, I said slowly, you're saying I'm the only one who can crack this? He didn't nod, he didn't move. He just held the key between us like an invitation I wasn't supposed to refuse. My brain lit up, algorithms, patterns, rotations, all flooding in at once. This was a snare, yes, but it was also brilliant, infuriatingly brilliant. If I failed, the investigation froze. If I succeeded, we'd regain momentum, but because I'd been dragged deep into something only Veritas bred for. Theron watched me with a quiet intensity, the kind that stripped the room down to just the two of us. He was placing his trust, however fractured, in my hands. I leaned closer, voice low. Fine, then it's my problem. I'll handle it, but you have to trust me. No more hesitation. His eyes lifted to mine, the distance replaced with something heavier. Acknowledgement, necessity, the weight of shared danger. And just like that, the key stopped feeling like an obstacle and started feeling like a spark. A dangerous one, a thrilling one. And I was already in too deep to turn back. I didn't notice the hours slipping by until the candles were nothing but stubs. But there we were, still shoulder to shoulder, buried in reference books, paper scraps covered in half-legible substitutions, and that stubborn cipher key that refused to behave. We'd fallen into a rhythm without even trying. Theron would murmur a correction under his breath, and I'd adjust it, trace the next pattern, slide the note toward him without looking up. We were close, ridiculously close. Our knees kept brushing under the desk, and every time it happened, my stomach did this traitorous little flip. Neither of us acknowledged it. We didn't have to. The tension wasn't just math and symbols. It was him. The way he leaned a little too close, the quiet hum of concentration between us, the faint scent of his coat when he angled over my notes. I was hyper-aware of everything. Every exhale, every shift of paper. The scratch of pencil sounded like it echoed off the walls. And somehow, in that thick, focused silence, I could feel him noticing me too. Not staring, just aware. Present in a way that synced with the rhythm we'd fallen into. Minutes bled into hours. My fingers ached. My brain begged me to stop. But every small breakthrough hit like a jolt straight to the bloodstream, so I kept going. And every brush of our knees sent my thoughts scattering. We weren't talking about anything that would justify sitting this close. No personal chatter to break the tension. Just numbers and logic and that strange electric quiet. I'd slide a page toward him. He'd take it with a glance that never quite met my eyes. Then we'd bend back over the table, heads tilted toward each other like gravity had opinions about us. I could hear his breathing, steady, deliberate, and at some point it lined up with mine. The room felt smaller for it. Smaller, warmer, and far too intimate. Anytime I thought about breaking the silence, just naming the tension, giving it shape, I stopped myself. Saying it out loud would fracture the whole thing. Too sharp, too fragile, too dangerous. The unspoken version was safer. When we finally leaned back, blinking at the gray hint of dawn creeping through the window, exhaustion hit me all at once, but it came laced with a high. We'd made more progress than I dared hope for. And somehow our knees brushed again as we pushed back from the desk. I felt it. Felt him feel it, even if he didn't show it. We were a team, a dangerous, forbidden, combustible team, and I had a sinking, thrilling certainty neither of us would walk away from this unchanged. I knew the instant it clicked. My chest tightened, my mind firing on every cylinder at once. The cipher wasn't just symbols, it was rhythm, misdirection, a layered maze, meant to break anyone who didn't approach it with the right mix of patience and obsession. And we'd had both. I leaned back, breathless, staring at the page as the pieces locked into place. I looked at Theron. His hand froze mid-gesture, jaw taut. He knew. He knew before I said a word. The pattern? It's recursive, I said, my voice shaking a little from the hit of adrenaline. Each substitution folds into the next. It's deliberate chaos, the final sequence. It's a map. His eyes widened, not in surprise, but in something far more dangerous. Respect. That quiet, weighty kind that said, "This is why you're here." He leaned closer, and for a heartbeat, all the tension, every argument, every pull and push, crystallized into something sharp and electric. I traced the decrypted lines. The target was there, embedded in the pattern, a critical communication hub within the Citadel. But no name, no mole. Just confirmation that the threat was close, closer than either of us wanted to admit. Finally, I breathed. Not triumph, release. Everything we'd poured into this, every exhausted hour, every accidental touch, every spike of fear, it all funneled into that single moment. Theron let out a slow breath and nodded. No congratulations, no theatrics, just a look that said, "I see you, and I'm not stepping away from this." My heart lurched, not with relief, something wilder. Victory, edged with the knowledge that the danger was far from over. We had the target, but the mole was still buried somewhere inside the walls we were trying to defend. I sagged back in my chair, drained but buzzing, staring at the map the cipher had revealed. For a moment, the rest of the world could have burned. This puzzle, this breakthrough, it was ours, and I'd earned it. "You did it," Theron said softly, the words carrying a surprising weight, something close to awe. "We did it," I corrected. Because yes, I'd cracked it, but without him, without the strange rhythm we'd locked into, I wouldn't have had the clarity to see it. We were dangerous together. And gods, it felt good. But the high came with a shadow. The mole was still out there watching, adapting. And now we knew where they'd strike. The triumph was real, but the sweetness of it edged toward something dangerously close to fear. The room fell quiet. Not the peaceful kind. This was the quiet after a storm breaks, when your muscles finally start remembering what it feels like not to be braced for impact. Our eyes stayed fixed on the decrypted pages, our fingers hovering above them like touching them might undo everything. And then we breathed. It wasn't planned. It wasn't even conscious. It just happened. A shared exhale, our shoulders brushing as we leaned back, the warmth of it hitting harder than it had any right to. It carried everything we'd been choking down, the fear, the fatigue, the grind of chasing an invisible enemy. His chest rose and fell against mine in that tiny, jarring moment of closeness. It lasted maybe a second, but adrenaline was still living under my skin, and I felt it in him too. The unspooling, the tiny crack in both our walls. For that heartbeat, he wasn't the prince. He wasn't the strategist. He was just a man sitting too close to me in the dawn. The smell of his coat, wood smoke, metal polish, and something sharper I couldn't name, pulled me in, grounding and destabilizing at the same time. I realized then, painfully clearly, how much of my attention had been orbiting him all night. How the triumph wasn't just mental anymore, it was physical. I shifted, giving myself the barest hint of space, but our shoulders still aligned. Heat lingered. Awareness lingered. His breath hitched almost imperceptibly, eyes flicking to me before dropping back to the page. That shared breath felt like a confession. Quiet, unintended, too honest. For a sliver of time, nothing existed outside that suite. Not the mole, not the citadel, not even the cipher we just dragged into the light. Just the weight of his shoulder against mine, the afterglow of adrenaline, and the dizzy realization that we were too close and that neither of us hated it. It was dangerous, forbidden, exhilarating. Because even in victory, I knew this was more than relief. It was the first real crack in the wall, and it was terrifyingly, achingly real. I didn't realize how tight my chest had been until it loosened, and then I laughed. Not a polite breath, not a smirk. A real laugh, the kind that shakes loose whether you want it to or not. And before I could smother it, it escaped. Theron froze. I could practically hear his thoughts crash into each other. Surprise, disbelief, maybe mild horror. And then he laughed too. Not the measured, diplomatic version he used like a shield. A real one. Quick, bright, unguarded. It was absurd. Laughing in a war room suite, surrounded by half-solved terror and sleepless paranoia. I wanted to swallow it down, shove it back into the walls I lived behind, but his laugh caught mine and the whole room warmed. For a heartbeat, his eyes caught mine, open and unguarded in a way I'd never seen. Not a prince, not a weapon, just a man who'd forgotten, briefly, how heavy everything was. There was warmth there, fleeting but real, and it hit me like a punch. He pulled it back fast, of course. The jaw tightened, the posture straightened, but I'd seen it, and it was a problem. A very big problem, because something inside me reacted, fast and addictive. One shared laugh, and the whole balance between us trembled. I felt the pull, sharp and dangerous. Wanting more of that warmth was a mistake I couldn't afford, but I was already halfway there. I caught my breath, letting the laughter fade, letting the walls slide back into place, but the echo stayed, humming under my skin. That tiny flash of joy had done more to unsettle me than any threat the mole had ever posed. And just like that, the moment snapped. Reality swept back in, the cipher, the danger, the looming threat. But the truth hung between us. I'd tasted something warm and human in him, and God's help me, I wanted it again. I knew how dangerous that was, and I still didn't care. The laughter faded, but the air between us stayed charged. Theron leaned back, shoulders barely brushing mine, and I caught a glance he didn't mean to give. Not strategy, not suspicion, just recognition, quiet and human. and maybe something like relief that neither of us had shattered under the pressure. I realized then how much I'd come to rely on that thin thread between us. Not on the prince, not on the mind everyone feared, but on him. The person forged in the gaps between duty and survival, the one who'd stood next to me through every awful twist of this shadow war. The truth hit me hard. I enjoyed this. I liked being his partner. Terrifying revelation, really. I trained myself my whole life not to want things like this, not to rely on anyone. And here I was, already caught in a trap I used to mock other people for falling into. But it was undeniable. Our survival depended on this bond, the trust, the rhythm, the unspoken understanding we'd built without meaning to. I wanted to resent it. I couldn't. I looked at him again, careful, measured, pretending I wasn't feeling anything at all. But I knew he felt it too. The weight, the pull, the tether we'd wrapped around each other without ever naming it. And in that charged, quiet afterglow, I accepted it. Accepted that what we'd built tonight wasn't going anywhere. That the line between duty and desire had blurred past recognition. That our partnership, dangerous, unspoken, and necessary, was now as essential as any strategy. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. And it was exactly what we needed. I knew something was different the moment the carriage left the Citadel Road and rattled onto that narrow path through the pines. Calling it a road was generous. It looked more like a suggestion. The trees closed in around us, swallowing the world, until all I could hear was hooves, wind, and my heartbeat punching me from the inside. It should have been peaceful. It wasn't. The Citadel had been a nightmare, yes. But at least it was familiar chaos. Predictable chaos. This was quiet, and quiet is just danger in polite clothing. When the carriage finally lurched to a stop, I leaned toward the slit of a window. The royal retreat, allegedly a simple hunting lodge, rose out of the trees like someone had dropped a palace into the wilderness. Elegant, ornate, and completely lifeless. Like it was holding its breath. Theron stepped out first, and even from inside, I felt the tension radiating off him. Not his usual brand either, something sharper. He moved like someone walking into a place that used to feel safe, and suddenly didn't. I followed, and the first thing that hit me was the air. Cold, clean, heavy, with a kind of knowledge I didn't like. The second thing was the silence. No guards shuffling, no clipped voices, no footsteps, just wind and towering pines watching us like judges. 3 guards by the door, 1 patrolling the clearing. That was it. The perimeter team, I asked? Inside. Reduced presence, he said, voice flat enough to qualify as fiction. Reduced. Sure, 1 word for it. He walked ahead, shoulders stiff, jaw carved from stone. Not the tension of politics. The tension of someone pretending not to reopen an old wound. This is unusually light, I said, stepping beside him. It's standard, he said, without even trying to make it believable. It's always been secure enough. Secure enough until it isn't. The retreat was beautiful in an old world way, stately, slightly crumbling, full of ghosts, but everything about it felt wrong, too empty, too exposed, too alone. The doors closed behind us with a deep, theatrical thud that the universe definitely didn't need to add, but fine. Message received. Minimal security, middle of nowhere, a mole 2 steps ahead. Perfect. The prickling along my spine didn't leave. It dug in deeper. This place wasn't a retreat. It was a vacuum, pulling us out of the noise and the watchful eyes and every layer of safety we'd had left. And the worst part? I didn't realize this was the safest the next 72 hours were ever going to feel. Because the real danger hadn't started yet. But it was coming. I could feel it breathing down our necks before we'd even walked down the first quiet hallway. I swear the cold hit before the door even finished closing behind us. Out in the trees, Theron had been tense, yes, but it was the kind of tension that still felt shared, like we were standing in the same storm, bracing for the same lightning. Inside the retreat, someone flipped a switch and emptied him out. He didn't look at me. Not once. He walked ahead, spine straight, shoulders rigid, like a man trying very hard not to crush something he couldn't replace. At first, I thought he was just taking in the place, settling, resetting. But then he stopped at a long hallway and turned his head, not his body, just enough to acknowledge me, and the temperature somehow dropped even further. His face wasn't angry. Anger would have been simple. He just looked, shuddered, like a door had slammed shut behind his eyes. Your quarters are down there. Short, precise, Not rude, just stripped clean of everything that made him feel like the same man I'd spent half the night sorting ciphers with. I blinked. Are we not? No. He cut me off before the question even formed. We'll work separately for now. I tried to read him, but he kept his gaze fixed somewhere over my shoulder, like meeting my eyes would cost him something he couldn't afford. His jaw was so tight, I half expected to hear it crack. Right. Okay. A shift, then. You'll take the study on the east side, he said, still not looking at me. There are reports you can organize. Cross-reference the perimeter logs with the carriage manifest from the last 6 months. Look for anything inconsistent. A task. A real one, but also the kind you assign someone when you want them nowhere near you. I nodded slowly. And what will you be doing? Handling the rest. That was it. No explanation. No trace of the rhythm we'd finally found in the Citadel. No echo of that ridiculous charged moment when we looked at each other over the cipher table and whatever that almost was. He started to turn away, and something in me pulled tight. Not anger, something heavier, stranger. We were supposed to be allies now. Temporary, yes, but still. We'd been working well together. And I wasn't prepared for how fast he could retreat from that. Theron, I said quietly. He froze. For a heartbeat. His shoulders rose, subtle and pained, like his name had hit something soft he didn't want to admit existed. But he didn't turn around. I thought we were. I stopped, because I didn't know what word I was reaching for. Never mind. He gave a tiny nod, the kind people give when they're agreeing with the silence instead of what was actually said. Then he walked away. I stood there staring down the empty hallway, trying to make sense of it. I kept replaying the last 24 hours. The discovery of the cipher, that breathless moment when we cracked it together. The way he'd looked at me afterward, like he was seeing something he wasn't sure he was allowed to want. And now he couldn't look at me at all. I told myself it didn't matter. That distance was better, safer than whatever had been simmering between us at that table. But even as I headed toward the east wing, something crawled under my ribs. A quiet certainty that something had fractured the second we stepped into this place. Not the alliance, not the investigation, something more private. Something I wasn't supposed to want in the first place. And the worst part? I didn't know if the cold was temporary or if this was who he was without the chaos of the Citadel to crack him open. Either way, it wasn't the worst part of the next hour. Not even close. I didn't make it to the study before things got strange. The East Wing had this narrow hallway that always felt too quiet, like the walls were leaning in to listen. I was halfway down when I heard footsteps. Soft, quick, nothing like Theron's confident stride. This sounded like someone trying to finish something before they were caught. I slowed and edged around the corner. Seraphina, standing far too close to one of Theron's private couriers. Not a palace messenger, not an aide. His personal courier, the kind who only ever handled top-level, sensitive, or potentially lethal information. Their gloves were still on. The satchel hung open. Seraphina's hand hovered near it, like she just slipped something inside and was pretending she hadn't. No smile, no small talk. Calm, neutral. Which, for Seraphina, was basically shorthand for, something terrible just happened. My stomach tightened. The courier cleared their throat. Shall I deliver a reply? Minister? Minister. Not lady. Not Seraphina. Titles only shift like that when hierarchy is being emphasized or when someone wants deniability. Seraphina glanced toward the main hall, toward where Theron had gone, then shook her head lightly. No, the king will decide if a response is necessary. Smooth voice, almost gentle. But underneath it, there was bite, calculation. That tone she used when she wanted something to land exactly where it would hurt. The courier nodded and stepped back. And then it happened. A tiny hesitation, like they weren't sure if they should look at me. They did see me. I wasn't hiding. I wasn't even trying. But instead of greeting me, bare minimum court etiquette, their gaze slid right past me. Like meeting my eyes might expose something they weren't allowed to reveal. My heart dropped. I knew that look. I'd seen it in the Citadel the morning after the explosion. People carrying news they couldn't share. News that always involved me. And suddenly, Theron's sudden coldness made a sick sort of sense. This wasn't him pulling away out of nowhere. This wasn't second thoughts about the alliance, the cipher, or whatever else had been building between us. Something had hit him. Hard. And it had arrived right here, in that satchel. Serafina smoothed her sleeve, face perfectly blank, the expression she wore when she was 3 moves ahead. "You should get to your assignment, Lady Vanya," she said, finally acknowledging me. "His Majesty needs those logs sorted immediately." I kept my expression steady. He told me. Good. Her smile was polite and hollow. Then you understand the importance of keeping to your designated responsibilities. There it was. A neat little blade slipped between my ribs. Designated responsibilities, in Serafina speak, meant stay out of the way, stay away from him, and don't ask questions you aren't meant to hear the answers to. I watched the courier disappear down the corridor, moving a little too fast for someone with nothing to hide. I didn't bother responding to Serafina. I just turned toward the study, pulse thudding. And the pieces snapped together almost too cleanly. Theron's sudden cold, the courier's avoidance, Serafina's immaculate calm. She'd sent him something meant to split us apart. Something personal, something aimed at me, and whatever it was, I could already feel it tightening around my throat. But the timing bothered me most. Serafina never played her hand early. If she'd already made a move, the real blow was still coming, and it was going to land exactly where I was weakest. I found him in the study, of course. Where else would Theron hide when he didn't want anyone, especially me, reading his face? He stood by the tall window, half turned away, ready to pretend he hadn't heard me enter. The room was too quiet, not peaceful, suspicious, like stepping directly into someone else's unfinished thoughts. "Logs are sorted," I said, keeping my voice neutral. Practical, safe. He didn't look at me. Not immediately. He gave a tiny nod, the kind you give a colleague you barely tolerate in a meeting that should have ended a half hour ago. But when he finally turned and his eyes met mine, everything in me dropped. Because that look, it was brutal. He wouldn't meet my gaze fully, but he kept cutting glances at me, sharp, quick, like he was measuring something, checking for damage or guilt. His eyes were harder than they'd been in weeks. Flat, controlled. Cold the way ice is cold, quiet until you touch it and realize it burns. And he wasn't just looking at me, he was looking through me, dissecting choices, words, moments, peeling them open for poison. My chest tightened so fast it made me angry, because suddenly it felt like I was the one who'd done something wrong. "Is something the matter?" I asked, keeping my voice even. His jaw snapped tight the instant I spoke. Not tense, punishing, like he was holding back something sharp enough to cut us both. "I'm fine," he said. "Sure, and I'm the reigning champion of healthy emotional detachment." He wasn't fine, not remotely. I knew that jaw. I'd watched it clench when the council accused him of negligence after the border collapse, when someone mentioned the guards who died under his command. That jaw was where he kept every fear he refused to admit, and now it was aimed squarely at me. He stepped past me, slow and deliberate, and the whole time his gaze skimmed over my face like he was hunting for cracks. And then, I swear I saw it. A flash, barely a second. Gone before I could catch it. Doubt. Not political doubt. Not strategic doubt. Doubt in me. It hit so hard I forgot how to breathe. Resentment burned up fast, not because he pulled away, but because it snapped me back into place in his world. Not a partner, not an ally, not the person who'd solved a cipher with him while he kept looking at me like it startled him to enjoy it. Right now, I was a threat, a variable, a liability he needed to reassess before I got too close. And it hurt. More than it should. More than I wanted to admit. I hated that Serafina had gotten to him so cleanly. I hated that he couldn't see it. I hated that I couldn't tell him. I couldn't say, "You're looking at me like I set your kingdom on fire." I couldn't say, "You don't have to be afraid of me." Both would make everything worse. I swallowed. If there's something I should know, there isn't. Too fast, too sharp, which told me everything. He didn't try to hide the distance after that. He moved around me with this calculated space, like I was fragile or volatile. At the door he paused, just for a breath, and I caught one last flicker, raw, terrified, under all that ice. Fear, not of me, not of danger, fear of choosing wrong, of trusting the wrong person. And for a moment I didn't see the king. I saw the boy who'd carried too many losses and built a fortress out of them. Then he shut the door. And all I could think was, if Serafina wanted a wedge between us, she didn't just drive it in, she carved it deep. And whatever she sent him, this was only the beginning. We left the lodge in a carriage I definitely hadn't chosen. One of those official contraptions. Therapeutic, he called it later. Meant to make the country believe we work better as a matched set. The horses were dressed for ceremony instead of comfort, tossing their heads like they knew they were part of the spectacle. Their breath rose in pale ribbons. The reins smelled like tar and leather, and some summer I hadn't felt in years. We sat too close. Not because either of us wanted to, because the bench was narrow and the world outside suddenly felt louder than the silence between us. Even the space he left wasn't polite distance. It felt deliberate, like a sentence cut in half by an abrupt comma. I made myself look at the scenery, trees doing their timeless job, standing, listening, holding secrets. The valley stretched out like an old map. Fields, a thin blue river, a cluster of birch older than any of our arguments. The air smelled like crushed pine and cold stone. Nature, of course, had zero interest in our politics. It just kept being enormous and indifferent. Theron rode opposite me, 1 foot on the carriage step, posture rigid, face set. When he spoke, it was clipped, orders to the driver, a few curt questions about protocol, nothing meant for me. He handled me the way you handle a complicated ledger, essential to balance, dangerous to touch. At one point, our knees brushed, just the edge of a step, just a second. But the jolt went straight through the cloth of my skirt like a dead wire waking up. I pulled back on instinct. He didn't react at all. No apology, no acknowledgement, just a small adjustment of his coat, eyes ahead, a silent message I could practically hear. See? Nothing happened. But something always happens when you're close enough to notice the small things. The way he held the reins, the tension in his fingers that never eased in public, the tiny scar on his knuckle I hadn't cataloged before. I cataloged it now. I always do. We passed a stone marker swallowed by moss. The steward had told me about this place yesterday, the Betrayal Memorial. A governor had turned on his own here, in a meeting almost identical to the one we were headed to. A handshake turned to a blade. People still stopped to remind themselves which promises were worth less than the ink used on them. Theron didn't point it out. He never narrates. He edits the world by omission. But when we rolled past that stone, I felt it anyway, like the aftershiver that follows lightning. The whole valley seemed to lean in with us, listening. The driver took us onto a narrow chestnut-lined lane. Sunlight flickered over Theron's shoulder in a shifting pattern. Being this close, I could hear him breathe, the tiny flutter of it, the soft scrape of fabric when he shifted. None of it confession. Just the sound of someone who trained himself to stay steady and practiced until steadiness became a weapon. I wanted to say something, to demand an explanation for the coldness he'd wrapped around himself like a second cloak. I wanted to tell him Serafina was sliding pieces under the table while he focused on the edges. But restraint is a language we both speak. We had rules, a pact, a fragile, ridiculous arrangement built out of mutual necessity, and the pact never promised immunity to doubt. So I watched his hands instead. Small gestures don't lie. He kept one hand too close to his side, thumb worrying at the glove seam. The other rested on the rail, fingers splayed like he was checking his balance, checking that the world still obeyed him. The ride felt like an exam I'd forgotten to study for. Every hoofbeat marked time, until we'd have to face people trained to detect weakness. I imagined their eyes on us, hunting for cracks. The space between us felt like a paper shield. We turned into a clearing, a wide dip in the land with a single ancient oak standing sentinel. Benches were already set out, servants arranging tiny flags and banners with the reverence of setting an altar. Diplomats would gather soon. Eyes, cameras, ritual. The endless performance of stability. The driver eased the carriage to a stop, and the motion settled into me like punctuation at the end of a sentence. Theron finally looked at me. Not quite accusing this time. Something closer to resignation, maybe obligation. And for the first time since the cipher, a sliver of softness cracked the surface. Small, almost imperceptible, but real. Then Serafina stepped out of the trees. Practiced smile, immaculate posture, walking like the world belonged to her in installments. My stomach dropped. Not because of her, because of what she represented. This clearing wasn't just diplomatic stagecraft. It was a historical wound dressed up with bunting. And her easy, too familiar approach felt like the sprung jaw of a trap. We were supposed to be united here. The country wanted a tableau, Two steady figures, one story, one front. But choreography is a poor substitute for truth. For me, the silence between steps mattered more. For Theron, that silence had begun to sound like a verdict. I stilled my hands, kept my face neutral, kept every gesture inside the lines of control I'd spent years refining. The carriage door opened. I stepped down into the oak's shadow. The air smelled like cut grass and something darker, anticipation, or malice wearing perfume. Theron moved beside me with the polished ease of a man who'd rehearsed public touch until it felt like muscle memory. He offered his arm. I took it out of habit, not warmth. And then, right as our hands met, the world flickered. A movement in the trees. A flash, quick as a winked-out lantern, someone watching, someone signaling. The whole careful ritual dropped away, and one truth snapped into focus. We were being maneuvered, and if someone was maneuvering us, the next move wouldn't be gentle. Once the last attendant drifted out of earshot, I snapped. Not theatrically, not loudly, just enough. Enough pretending nothing was wrong. Enough quiet. I wasn't built for silence with him, not after the cost it had taken to get this far. So I cut him off on the gravel path beneath the ancient oak that looked like it had watched centuries of people ruin each other. I stepped in front of him and said it plainly. "What's going on with you?" He didn't even stop walking. That alone told me more than words. Theron always stopped when something mattered. That soldier stillness was his tell. But now he just kept moving, hands clasped behind him like he was giving a tour of neutral ground. "I'm focused on the agenda," he said, so formal it could have been engraved on brass. "We can't afford distractions." I laughed, sharp enough to sting. "Distractions. That's what we're calling this?" He exhaled, letting out just enough air to avoid admitting a feeling. "Elara," he said, so careful it made my teeth clench. "You were tense this morning, raised your voice. It's not like you." I blinked at him. "Are you giving me a performance review?" "It's not a review. It's an observation." That's worse. A review means you're doing your job. An observation means you've been judging me from a distance. Finally, he stopped. He turned just enough to give me his profile, the posture of a man hoping the problem would dissolve if he stood very still. "So that's it?" I said. "You're cold because you think I'm reactive?" Silence, which was the answer. I stepped closer, still within the rules, but close enough to make him feel the heat off my anger. "Just tell me the truth," I said. "Whatever it is, I can handle it. But don't treat me like I'm the weak link. You owe me better." His throat moved, words he didn't want to say gathering there. "Elara," he started softly, "your focus is drifting. And right now that's dangerous?" I cut in. "Unpredictable? Bad optics? Pick one." His eyes met mine for half a heartbeat, fear or guilt or both, then shuddered again behind that polished diplomatic mask. "This isn't personal," he said. "It feels personal. It isn't. It's necessary. Necessary, God. The favorite word of people who want to dress their cruelty in clean lines. You don't get to do that," I said. "You don't get to shut me out and call it strategy." "Elara, look at me," he did, slowly, carefully, like I was a machine with a hair trigger. "Is this about trust?" I asked. "Because if it is, just say it." His jaw clenched, hard enough I heard it. "I trust you," he said, "but I can't have you." He cut himself off. That hesitation, God, that was the truth peeking through. "Can't have me what?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The look said everything. I was becoming too much, too close, too important. And he was terrified of what that meant. "So that's where we are," I said. "You think I'm the problem. I think we need to stay controlled." "Controlled," I repeated. "Right. Nothing says control like freezing out your partner." He flinched, barely. But I caught it. Footsteps approached. Staff, Delegate Serafina. The moment snapped shut like a trap. He stepped back, mask on, neutral expression, public version activated. And I stood there, half of a truth burning a hole in my throat. Whatever answer I wanted from him, I wasn't getting it on that path. And what hit us next, that was worse. We didn't even make it back to the lodge before he dropped the real blow. We were walking, side by side, miles apart, when he said my name. Quiet, cautious. "Elara." I slowed. "Yes?" He didn't look at me. "I need to address something." My stomach drew tight. "Okay." A pause. Too long. Long enough for me to feel the cold edge of whatever was coming. Then he said it. "You've been uncontrolled." I stopped so abruptly the gravel skidded. He didn't. He just kept walking, hands behind his back, voice flat and clinical like he was reading a memo about someone else. And your emotional volatility is becoming a liability. For a second, the world went silent. Even the wind froze. Those words hit harder than a blow. Not insults, worse. They were the vocabulary of every person who tried to break me. The exact phrasing: uncontrolled, volatile, liability. The holy trinity of people who wanted you silent, small, sanitized. And now they were coming from him, Theron, the one person who wasn't supposed to weaponize them. I forced myself to walk again, though everything in me wanted to retreat, hide, curl inward. Wow, I said finally. It came out thin, humorless. Okay, that's a choice. He glanced at me, just a flicker, but enough to see it landed. He didn't soften, didn't backtrack. He went further. I'm telling you this because you need to hear it, he said. You can't let your emotions dictate the room. It compromises our work. Our work. That was a knife. I laughed, but it was the brittle kind that happens right before something breaks. So I'm a problem to contain now? It's not about what I think. It's what the situation requires. There it was, the sentence people use before stripping you of everything you've built. My chest tightened. A ringing filled my ears. I tried to breathe around it, but old wounds are efficient, built for speed. Those old insecurities sprinted right back to the surface, eager to be useful again. And the worst part, a small, awful part of me believed him. Right? I whispered. Got it. I didn't even recognize my voice. Hollow, distant. He didn't reach for me. Didn't apologize. Just kept walking like he hadn't cracked something open inside me that I'd spent years reinforcing. I followed because pride is ridiculous and stubborn and refuses to let me lag behind. But one truth settled into place, sharp and certain. Whoever wrote that report knew me. Knew him. Knew exactly how to split us cleanly. And the consequences of that moment, those were even worse. I moved through the rest of the day like a ghost. Not the dramatic kind. More like my brain had been yanked out of its housing and left floating somewhere with no walls. Theron's words weren't just sharp, they'd been precise, surgical, uncontrolled. Emotional liability. They kept echoing in my skull like someone knocking from the inside. I waited for my usual defenses to kick in, sarcasm, wit, that neat little layer of distance I carry around like a badge. Nothing. My throat felt sealed shut. My tongue was a dead thing. And it hit me, suddenly and horribly. My so-called armor wasn't steel. It wasn't even leather. It was paper. Transparent, fragile, already shredded. I wanted to disappear. Or at least stop being visible. But even when he avoided my eyes, even when he stood perfectly controlled and perfectly distant, I still felt gutted. Exposed. Like he'd peeled back every layer I'd worked years to perfect and left me standing there with nothing but the raw, shaking core. And every memory of judgment I'd ever absorbed decided to pile on at once. Every citadel dismissal. Every mentor who told me emotion was weakness. Every betrayal I'd chalked up to bad luck. All of it rose together like a tidal wave. And this time the verdict felt personal. Not a critique of my politics or choices, but of me, my worth, my legitimacy, my right to stand beside someone like him at all. And the worst part? I couldn't even hate him. Because I knew those words weren't invented. They'd been planted, designed to hit me where I was weakest. He wasn't attacking me. He was reflecting back all the things I'd never wanted anyone to see. The version of myself I show the world, the calm, measured, unflappable Elara, collapsed inward, and what was left was raw, humiliated, and terrified. I wanted to run. I almost did. But then I looked up and he was just there, not gloating, not cruel, just him. And somehow that made everything worse, like I'd been stripped bare right in front of the only person I'd ever let pass the surface. For a moment, my entire identity dangled by a thread. I felt overwhelmingly, nauseatingly visible. And I hated it. But I also couldn't look away. I was powerless, and deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. I was already undone. I didn't know how much longer I could stand being in that room with him. Every glance felt like judgment. Every quiet breath, another reminder that he might see me differently now. Flawed, volatile, maybe even dangerous. The alliance we'd built felt like it had cracked under the weight of what he'd said. Part 2 used to feel like our shared victory. Now it felt like something fragile enough to shatter if either of us breathed wrong. I kept replaying everything. The late-night debates, the small private jokes, the way our strategies fit together like two halves of a lock. Now all of it felt thin. Breakable. Like I'd been dangling from a rope I thought was secure, only to realize it had been fraying the whole time. I wanted to retreat, not physically, but into the old walls I'd always relied on. The lie that control equals safety, that if I measured every word and stepped only where the ground was solid, I'd never fall. And for the first time in weeks, that lie actually sounded comforting. But then there was Theron, the one person who'd seen sides of me I'd never let anyone else touch, the one person whose judgment mattered more than I would ever admit aloud. And he was standing there, silent and unreadable, an entire fortress behind his eyes. Maybe he believed those planted words. Maybe he didn't. But I couldn't tell, and that uncertainty cut deeper than anything he'd said. I wanted to shove him, shake him, demand he say something real. But I felt too heavy, too tangled in fear and longing, and all the messy things I'd never admit to anyone. It infuriated me how much I still needed him, even now, when everything in me wanted to sprint in the opposite direction. Could I stay? Could I risk the vulnerability of staying, knowing it might break me further? Or was walking away the only way to survive myself? I closed my eyes, letting silence wrap around me like ice. Stay and fight for something that might already be ruined, or vanish into solitude, safe but completely alone. Both choices hurt, but the thought of walking away hurt worse. When I opened my eyes, he was watching again, and for the first time I realized the decision wasn't entirely mine. Whatever came next, it would take both of us. I wasn't ready to move, but something small, shaky, stubborn took root in me. I didn't want to face any of this alone, and that terrified me more than everything else combined. That split second of resolve didn't last long, because as we rode toward the lodge, something in the woods snapped into focus. Not some dramatic flash, just a subtle shift in the terrain. A disturbance in the underbrush, a scuff in the dirt, tiny, precise, wrong. My heartbeat ticked faster. Someone had tampered with the path. Theron didn't see it. He was rigid, focused ahead, locked in that cold logic he'd used earlier. Ironically, the same logic that made him blind to actual danger. But the analytic part of my brain lit up instantly. Fresh footprints, a cleanly snapped branch, purposeful movement, all of it added up to one thing: sabotage. I caught his eye, tilted my head toward the disturbance, hoping he'd pick it up without me shouting. A microscopic shift went through him, awareness, annoyance, uncertainty, but his emotional walls held firm. My mind started mapping escape routes before I even finished breathing. Every sound in the forest sharpened into threat. Rustling leaves, snapping twigs, the quiet that's too quiet. "We're exposed," I whispered. "The path isn't right." He barely glanced, but something in him braced, just barely. For the first time in hours, all the emotional noise inside me went quiet. An external threat has a way of stripping everything down to survival. Someone was out there, waiting, watching, setting the board, and we were walking straight into it. A moment later, I spotted the break in the boundary line. Clean, intentional cuts in the brush where the security marker should have been. My stomach flipped. "Theron," I said, pointing, "that line shouldn't be down." He didn't even turn his head. "It's nothing." I stared at him. "It's not nothing. That marker's part of the outer sweep. If it's down, someone." "You're reading shadows," he said, voice flat, tired, like he couldn't deal with me anymore. "You're emotional. You're not objective right now." I blinked. "I'm sorry. Run that by me again?" He finally looked over, but with the same cold, distant mask he'd been wearing since he gutted me earlier. "You're upset. That doesn't mean there's danger everywhere." Oh, that hit deep. Not because he dismissed the threat, though he did, but because he used that word again. Emotional. As if what he said earlier explained everything I did now. Except I wasn't misreading anything. I was seeing clearly, sharper than he was. "That brush was cut with a tool," I said, voice low. "Fresh. That means someone was..." "You're projecting," he cut in. My hands tightened. "My state. Sure." A cold, steady anger slid in. Not wild, focused. Because I saw it, the flicker of doubt in his eyes. A tiny crack before he sealed it up again. He knew I might be right, but he was so afraid of acknowledging the damage between us that he couldn't let himself validate anything I said. "If you can't separate this," I gestured between us, careful, controlled, "from your job, you're going to get us killed." His jaw locked. "You're escalating." "No," I said quietly, "I'm noticing." That landed. Not enough to break through, but enough to hit. Then he turned away. Just turned. And that was when I realized something awful. His emotional wall wasn't just hurting me. It was blinding him, leaving a perfect gap for the mole's plan to slide through. If I didn't act, we were dead. I didn't have long to stew in that fury before the world blew apart. 1 second, the woods were quiet. The next, a violent crack split the air, so loud it rattled my teeth. The horses panicked, jerking the carriage so hard I slammed into the wall. Something whizzed past my ear, fast, sharp, unmistakably lethal. Not a warning, a shot. Theron lunged for the reins, but the horses were already bolting. The carriage bucked wildly. Another crack shattered the glass beside me. I curled instinctively, hands over my head as shards rained down. "Get down," Theron yelled, already on it. The carriage swerved again, hard enough to throw me sideways. Pain shot up my neck, spots bursting behind my eyes. I heard screaming outside, then a heavy thud that made my stomach flip. I couldn't tell if we were still on the path or barreling into oblivion. More shots. Closer now. My ears rang so loud it felt like drowning in sound. I clawed at the seat, anything to stay anchored as the carriage bounced over the uneven ground like it wanted to shake us loose. Another jolt, another violent skid. Then the whole carriage lifted off the earth for a split second before smashing back down. Someone wanted us dead. Not intimidated, not scared, dead. And the worst part, this attack, the chaos, the noise, the violence, still wasn't the real hit. That part was coming, and we were nowhere near ready for it. The next few seconds didn't feel like seconds. They stretched, stuttering, like time hiccuped around me. The carriage hit another dip. My stomach lurched. My shoulders slammed into wood again. Blood, just a little, tasted metallic on my tongue. I tried to get my hands under me, to track which way death was coming from. I didn't get the chance. Something shifted in the air, a tiny, instinctive sharpening, and I looked up. Theron wasn't at the reins anymore. He had moved. I didn't see him cross the space. One moment he was fighting the horses, jaw locked, eyes burning with that cold, stubborn refusal to admit I'd been right. The next, he was in front of me. No thought, no plan, no strategy, just pure, primal movement. A low, fast dive that felt completely un-Theron. Every bone braced for impact. "Stay down," he said, rough, breathless. Then the carriage shuddered as something hit the side so hard the world seemed to dent inward. I flinched. He didn't. One arm locked on the seat for balance, the other braced across me, not touching exactly, but close enough to radiate heat, tension, and one sickening truth. He wasn't protecting himself. Only me. Another blast. Closer, wood splintered, shards raining over his back. He didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't check. He just was, between me and whatever death had scheduled today. My analytical brain, the part that could predict moves before they happened, flatlined. This wasn't politics or tactics or the Chancellor of Own playing a calculated game. This was instinct, raw, unfiltered. Theron's first thought had been, get between Elara and the danger. My chest went tight, like I'd swallowed a fist. Another impact slammed the carriage with a wet, splintering crunch. His arm lowered, bracing over my shoulder. Dust and wood filled the air. I couldn't see straight, but I could see him. Jaw clenched, shoulders locked, every part of him willing to take the blow if it meant I didn't. For one insane, impossible second, all I could think, what the hell are you doing, Theron? This wasn't alliance behavior, not enemy behavior, not our usual tense, forbidden, we pretend we don't care behavior. This was something else, reckless, human, forbidden. The carriage pitched again, harder. Wheels lifted, everything inside me shut down. The last thing I saw, Theron's arm tightening, his body folding over mine, then the world flipped. For a heartbeat, there was nothing. No sound, no motion, just ringing, like a bell inside my skull. I didn't know if we'd stopped or crashed or if the universe had paused for pity. All I knew, I was breathing, and Theron was welded over me, bracing for whatever came next. He didn't move. Not until I did. I shifted, tiny, experimental. He jerked back, caught, guilty. Not that it mattered. He braced one hand on the broken carriage wall, pushing upright. Slow. Too careful. Unsure I was intact. And then for one inhale, I saw it. Terror. Raw, naked fear. Not strategic caution. Not the practiced impatience he wore like armor. Just fear. And it was aimed at me. Half a second later, it was gone. Crushed, shoved back into his private dungeon of control. The polished neutrality returned. But his breathing hadn't caught up. His hands were still shaking. "Are you hurt?" he asked, voice tight, clipped, wrong, too fast. He'd forgotten how to fake calm. "I'm fine," I said, voice cracking. What the hell was that?" He didn't answer immediately. scanning the wreckage, the torn-up ground, anything but me. Jaw locked, shoulders angled halfway toward me. Then it hit me. Theron, the Chancellor of Argonne, unshakable, calculated, had thrown himself between me and the attack without thinking. His instinct had betrayed him. Not a choice, not a calculation, just raw action. My stomach dropped in a new way, heavy, strange, under my ribs. "Theron," I whispered. He froze. "Do you realize what you just did?" He didn't look. That was answer enough. Rules he drilled into me for months. Emotion is weakness. Attachment is liability. Protect no one. Favor no one. Especially not someone you're supposed to publicly despise. And yet, he had. Instinctively, recklessly, physically. When he finally looked, it was for a second. Enough to know I'd seen everything. That I knew. The flicker of panic crushed immediately. Then the mask returned. Voice clipped, icy. "Don't read into it." I laughed, sharp, shaky. Too late. He tensed, shifted, reaching for the door, pretending nothing had happened. But I couldn't stop staring. The man who prided himself on untouchable control had broken his own rules. He'd shown me something he never meant to. And in the wreckage, it hit me. The danger outside wasn't the only threat. His denial, his fear of admitting care, was just as lethal. I wasn't sure which would hit first. It took me a second to realize we'd stopped. Not just the carriage, my thoughts, my blood, my body. Everything was suspended, waiting to see if I was still whole. I pushed upright. Pain shot down my arm, sharp, unbroken, angry, ears still ringing, air thick with dust and splintered wood. We were alive, barely. Theron was halfway out, one hand on twisted metal, shoulders heaving, coat torn, streaked with dirt, and darker. He looked shaken, not furious, not cold, shaken. When he turned to me, eyes flicked over me fast, checking for blood, broken bones, missing limbs. Then slower, like he didn't trust the first pass. "Elara," he said, his voice God, raw, unshielded, blown out. I swallowed, tasted metal. "I'm okay," I said, though pain radiated through me like a warning bell. "Just bruised." He stepped closer, then paused. Hands hovering uselessly, trembling slightly. I'd never seen him shake. The man could stare down a firing squad. Almost losing me? "That did it. Are you sure?" "Careful. Quiet. Too damn human." "I'm sure," I said softly. He closed his eyes for half a second, tiny but enough to see how hard he was holding himself together. Jaw flexed, mask trying to stitch back, failing. He looked wrecked, and then I understood. The man who never broke, never faltered, never let instincts lead, had. He'd protected me without thinking. And now he was standing there, breathing hard, staring like he didn't understand why. Neither did I. I shifted, testing my ribs. Not broken. Painful, yes, boots crunching on splinters, reaching out instinctively for support. Theron moved instantly, not thinking, just there. Hand near my back, hovering, wanting to, but not daring. "You're hurt," he said. "No," I breathed, just dizzy. Chest tight, because the idea of me hurt, even a little, was unbearable to him. And then it sank in. The worst part wasn't the attack. It wasn't the sabotage. It wasn't even the bullets that nearly killed us. It was Theron Vellis. The man who never breaks had just shown he could. "Elara," he said again, soft. Not political, not strategic, just real. And in that wreckage, a tiny, terrifying part of me didn't want him to put the mask back on. For a long minute, neither of us said anything. Dust hung thick in the air, mixing with adrenaline, and my heartbeat felt like it was hammering against my teeth. But as the ringing faded, I realized Theron wasn't just catching his breath. He was unraveling, quietly, violently, like someone had kicked out the foundation he'd been standing on his whole life. He'd stepped a few paces away, maybe to check the road or assess the wreckage, but he wasn't doing either. He was leaning against the broken wheel, back to me, one hand pressed hard to jagged wood like it might hold him upright. His fingers shook, and his shoulders, God, not square, immovable, carved from iron. They were tight in a way that looked painful, like he was fighting something inside himself, not the world. I stepped closer. "Theron?" He didn't turn, didn't flinch. That was the first warning something was very, very wrong. He reacted to everything, every whisper, every shift in the wind, every emotion he tried to deny. Now, nothing. His breathing changed, sharp, uneven, too fast. The kind people use when they're trying desperately not to fall apart. And I knew I wasn't supposed to see this. No one was. He built walls by sunrise, reinforced them by lunch. But here, in the wreck of this carriage, glass still crunching under our boots. His walls weren't walls. They were wet paper. I moved slowly to face him, careful not to corner him. And when I finally saw his expression, really saw him, I forgot how to breathe. Haunted. Not startled. Not overwhelmed. Haunted. Like the near-death moment had ripped open a door and something old, brutal, and familiar had surged out. His eyes weren't on me. Not on the wreck. Not on the attack. They were somewhere else entirely. Dark and familiar in a way that made my stomach twist. Grief, shame, recognition, like he'd just relived losing someone. His jaw clenched, a breath tore through him like it hurt, and he blinked fast, trying to shove the past back into whatever locked compartment he'd buried it in. But the cracks widened. "Theron," I whispered. He shook his head once, not at me, at himself. Heel pressed to brow, mouth twitching, breath staggered. Half a second, and he looked young. Not younger in age, young in the way grief makes you. Raw, exposed, human. And maybe it was the first time I'd ever seen him without armor, without edges, without distance, without strategy. Just a man, standing in the ruins of a carriage, holding himself together with a shaking hand and a lifetime of unprocessed grief. And something in me cracked too. Not sympathy. This wasn't safe. It went past walls, past control. It hurt my chest because I knew exactly what he was fighting. He muttered something too soft for me to hear, then exhaled harshly, brokenly. Not a cry, not a groan, just the sound someone makes when they refuse to cry. His fingers curled into the jagged wood, tight enough I thought he might splinter it further. And then it hit me. All his coldness, restraint, calculated distance, it wasn't arrogance. It wasn't cruelty. It wasn't control. It was fear, the old kind. The kind that cages you so tight, you forget the world exists outside it. I stepped closer, not touching, just close enough that if he surfaced, he'd know I was there. His breath steadied a little, but his eyes were still unfocused, seeing two timelines at once, the present and the dark moment that carved him. I watched, helpless and stunned, as the man I'd spent weeks arguing with, avoiding, reading, distrusting, almost dying beside, shook. Actually shook. When he lifted his head, no mask, no armor, just a wounded, exhausted man who'd carried this grief too long. And I knew right then, this was going to ruin us. Once you see someone like that, once you see the part they hide, there's no going back. Not for them. Not for you. Not for whatever fragile thing you've built together. And I didn't even have time to breathe before I felt the next truth creeping toward me. If this was what he'd been hiding, I had no idea what would come next. I don't know what pushed me forward. Maybe it was the shaking. Maybe it was the way he looked braced for a blow only he could see. Or maybe it was just me, the part I shoved down every hour of every day. I moved before I could think, close enough to feel the heat radiating off him, close enough that if he turned, we'd collide. He didn't. He kept staring at the ground, and I did something I never do. I reached out, hand hovering for a second, ridiculous because it was just a shoulder, but crossing that invisible line felt inevitable. I let my fingers land lightly. No strategy, no politics, no calculation. It felt stupidly small, yet the only thing that made sense. His body went still, completely still, like he was afraid to move in case the moment shattered. I almost pulled away, almost apologized, almost pretended it was accidental. But then he leaned into it, barely. One small shift, but enough to punch the air out of me. This wasn't the cool, collected, untouchable man everyone feared. This wasn't the political equal who argued over worlds and fates. This was a man who needed someone, and he let it be me. My hand tightened just a little, enough to say, "I'm here. I'm real. You're not alone." He exhaled, a low, shaky surrender. Eyes closed, face no longer twisted. Just tired, bone-deep tired. Like he'd carried this weight so long he'd forgotten standing without it. "Theron?" I murmured, unsure what else to say. His name felt like the only word that fit. He swallowed, head tipping the tiniest bit toward my hand. 1 second, one instinct, one impossible moment of trust. And it changed everything. Because now I knew what he looked like when he needed comfort. And I knew what it felt like to give it to him. And worst of all, I knew he didn't pull away. When he finally straightened, slow, careful, rebuilding each layer of control, my hand slipped away. But he stayed close, turned slightly toward me, like my touch left a mark he couldn't shake. His eyes met mine. No mask, no walls, no edge, just him. And the world tilted. That look, it wasn't political. Not strategic, not cold and measured. It was painfully, dangerously real. Connection. Neither of us said a word, but we both knew. We'd crossed a line we weren't supposed to even acknowledge. And if that wasn't bad enough, the next heartbeat promised to be worse. The silence thickened, stretched like the air before a storm. He was still too close. I was still too aware of the way he'd leaned into my touch. Like he couldn't help it, like some part of him recognized something in me he didn't know how to name. And maybe that's why it happened. Because I looked at him, really looked, and underneath everything he hid, everything he weaponized, everything he pretended to be, there was a raw, cracked place that mirrored mine. And I thought, if he can bleed in front of me, I can stop pretending I'm made of stone. Words climbed my throat before I could stop them. "Theron," I said quietly. He looked at me like he wasn't sure he deserved to. "I need to tell you something." He didn't move, just watched, wounded alert, like another hit might come he couldn't dodge. I inhaled, voice hollow from years of holding back. I wasn't supposed to survive. Not the fire, not the collapse, not any of it. His brows tightened, but he didn't interrupt. My people think I walked out because I'm resilient or lucky or heroic nonsense. But the truth is, I didn't walk out. Someone dragged me out. Someone who didn't make it. The words burned as they came out. I remember her hand slipping, the ground giving out, looking back and seeing her fall, and I couldn't do anything. I froze, just a useless, terrified kid while I bit down hard before it spiraled. My eyes stung. She saved me instead of herself, and I've spent every day since pretending it makes sense. I hadn't noticed my hands trembling until he reached out, slow, deliberate, and covered one of them with his palm. The warmth hit like a shock, and the look on his face, not pity, not horror, not judgment, understanding. Quiet, deep, heavy understanding that pressed into my ribs. Relief hit me wild, dizzy, like I'd carried a boulder in my chest for years and finally set it down with it. I'd never told anyone this. Not my counsel, my advisors, not family. And here I was, giving it to someone I absolutely shouldn't trust. I swallowed. I don't know why I'm telling you. Maybe because you. I shook my head. Because you look like someone who understands losing what you're supposed to protect. His jaw clenched, not in anger, but helplessly. "And I trust you with this," I whispered. "More than my own kingdom." The air between us held, fragile, terrifying. Trusting him was dangerous. Confessing was reckless. But giving him the piece of my heart I'd locked away, that was something else entirely. He didn't speak. And honestly, silence from him scared me more than recoil ever could. He wasn't calculating, defending, hiding. He was just there. When he moved, it was tiny, a breath, shoulders shifting, weight of a shield dropped. "Elara," he said softly. Not Vanya, not parliamentarian, not opponent. Just my name, like he'd never said it before. He reached out, hesitated, then took my hand. The one that had held the dossier. He traced the spot where I'd gripped too tight, skin tender. Trauma keeps receipts, like he remembered, like it mattered. My breath hitched, his eyes met mine. No mask, no wall, nothing but fragile honesty. "I accept it," he said quietly. "All of it." Words that should have been small hit like balm on an old wound. "No judgment," he added, barely a breath. "Not from me." And I believed him. Not a rival, not a risk, not a political equal. He saw the fractures and didn't flinch. We both knew it. A quiet flicker and everything shifted, ground tilting, standing on the same side without planning it, hand warm and steady over mine. Shared knowledge. Awful, beautiful truth. We were survivors of things that shouldn't have happened. Not respect, not anymore. Deeper, heavier, dangerous. Thumb brushed once over my hand, barely noticeable. But it felt like an answer. A silent acceptance of every flaw, every wound, every bleeding crack. And as I sat there on the wrecked floor, bleeding from cuts, half covered in dust, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't just trusting him. I was starting to need him. And that was going to ruin everything. The moment stretched far longer than it should have. Longer than my pulse could tolerate. He was still holding my hand, just holding it, like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. But every nerve in me insisted it wasn't ordinary at all. My fingers tingled under his touch. My chest felt too tight, too full. Every inhale tasted like static, like the air had sharpened just for us. I tried to think. Really, I did. Logic, strategy, control. All the things I'd spent a lifetime clinging to were nothing but ghosts drifting past my ears. My head was fogged with something hotter, heavier, something I hadn't let myself feel in years. And then it struck me. He felt it too. His gaze, usually so precise and calculating, wasn't measuring anything now. It was devouring, raw, unfiltered, and almost painful in its intensity. His eyes darkened as they followed every tiny shift I made, every shallow breath. He leaned in just enough that I felt the heat radiating off him, a warmth that made the back of my knees go weak. I knew I should pull away. I wanted to. But wanting and doing are never the same thing. The moment his thumb brushed mine again, my body froze. My thoughts stuttered. Every piece of control I'd ever built cracked clean through. One impossible truth rose above the chaos. I wanted him. I wanted him here, now, in this wreck of a moment. And I hated myself a little for wanting it so badly. He shifted closer. Not enough to touch, but close enough that his breath, slow, deliberate, intoxicating, brushed my temple. My pulse thundered so loudly it drowned out caution. Every nerve ending lit up, screaming awareness, warning, desire. "Don't," I whispered. My voice trembled. My body didn't back it up. "We shouldn't." But he didn't step away. Not really. Just a tilt of his head, a quiet exhale. And suddenly the word shouldn't felt irrelevant. Our eyes locked. No analysis left, no curiosity. The connection between us was bright and consuming. Every shared wound, every confession, every fracture in our armor, it all tightened into this magnetic pull. A desire that wasn't shallow or reckless, but born from the raw truths we'd peeled back for each other. I felt him inhale, felt the weight of him, the heat, the tiny shifts in the air between us. And I leaned, barely, but enough. My chest brushed his arm. My hand, still in his, felt warm and alive and impossibly present. The air crackled around us, static and fear and wanting all tangled together. I wanted to pull back. I didn't. Not even a little. Moments like this don't wait. They don't care about strategy or morality. They strike hard and they don't apologize. And here in the ruins of the attack, after the confessions and unraveling and honesty, I realized I was completely devastatingly under his spell, and he was under mine. Every breath, every brush of fingers, every locked glance screamed the same truth. We shouldn't, but we weren't stopping. Not now. Not ever. That's when it hit me. Desire never asks for permission. It just takes. And all that was left was choosing whether to resist or surrender. It's wild how quiet a room gets when two people are seconds away from ruining their lives. Or, fine, changing them. But let's call this what it was. I knew exactly what I was doing, and I still did it. We were standing so close, the air felt like a live wire between us. His breath kept brushing my skin. My legs shook every time I inhaled. His hand was still wrapped around mine, warm and steady, probably the only reason I remained upright. I felt the shift in him, some internal line snapping, some ancient discipline giving way. His jaw tightened, then eased, like he was fighting himself and losing. I wasn't doing any better. My mind kept whispering the same things. This is insane. This is dangerous. You won't come back from this. But underneath all that, a smaller truth was whispering. You've wanted this for longer than you'll ever admit. I swallowed hard. My heart was pounding against my ribs. He didn't move closer or pull away. He just waited, holding himself still like he was giving me the choice. And that somehow made it worse. If we crossed this line, the blame would be mine. My decision, my risk. No one else to fault later. But I could feel how badly he wanted me. He wasn't hiding it anymore. His breathing had gone deeper, heavier. His eyes kept flicking to my mouth and then fighting their way back up. His fingers brushed mine again, sending a quiet electric jolt through me. I could have walked away. That was the last moment where escape was even vaguely possible. Instead, I stepped closer, just an inch, but it might as well have been a mile. He inhaled sharply, and that sound, God, that sound, went straight through me. Slow, deliberate, like the entire world had shrunk to the space between us. And I didn't stop. Not because I lost control. Honestly, that would have been the nicer explanation. No, I chose him. Fully. Consciously. It felt like snapping something sacred inside myself. The lie that control protects me, that distance keeps me clever, that I could ever be immune to someone like him. I wasn't immune. I never had been. So I closed the distance, slowly, like I was walking off a cliff and pretending the drop wasn't there. His forehead brushed mine, barely, but the contact unraveled something deep in my chest. He let out a breath against my lips, soft, strained, and I felt it all the way down my spine. His hand tightened around mine, anchoring both of us. There was no going back. I'd chosen him over reason, over politics, over the survival instincts I'd worshipped my whole life. And when I finally tilted my chin, closing the last fraction of space, that was the moment everything changed. But what happened next? Yeah, it was even worse. The moment my lips touched his, everything, every rule, every mask, every inch of distance shattered. It wasn't slow or tentative. It was immediate, chaotic, desperate. A collision of every feeling we'd buried for far too long. His hand cupped my face like he thought I'd vanish if he didn't hold on. My fingers slid into his hair before I even realized I'd moved. Instinct took over, raw, reckless instinct. And for the first time in years, I didn't fight it. We kissed like we'd been starving for it. Heat and longing and relief tangled together until I couldn't tell where I ended and he began. I felt him everywhere. His mouth, his shoulders, the press of his body, the tremor in his grip when he realized I wasn't pulling away. In that moment, everything else dropped away. Politics, duty, consequences, gone. It was just us, two broken people finding each other in the wreckage. I wanted to remember every second. The warmth of his hands, the shake in his breathing, the way our chests rose and fell in sync. When we finally broke apart, we didn't separate. Our foreheads stayed pressed together, breaths mingling, hearts pounding like they were sharing the same beat. That kiss, messy, forbidden, inevitable, was a confession. We'd surrendered. Completely. I wanted more. He did too. It was terrifying how easy it would have been to keep going. For a heartbeat, I let myself have it. The fire, the truth, the feeling, and it was everything. The heat of him still lingered on my lips, in my lungs, in my blood. But then, like ice sliding across skin, the world snapped back. The ruins weren't just scenery anymore. They were warnings, evidence, consequences. I pulled back just enough to breathe, and clarity hit me like a hammer. Every instinct I'd ever lived by screamed at once. Control, duty, distance. Gone. Every thread of armor shredded in one impossible kiss. Theron's eyes were still dark, still raw, but beneath the heat was recognition. He felt it too. The danger, the cost, the trap. My voice came out barely above a breath. Treason. The word landed like a blade, quiet, precise, perfectly true. He tensed, just a flicker, jaw tight, hands clenched. I could almost hear the gears turning in his mind, the whispers, the scandal, the fallout. But he didn't step away, didn't defend himself, didn't try to fix it. He stayed where he was. The warmth between us turned unbearable against the cold edge of reality. Desire and duty were oil and fire. One couldn't exist without burning the other. And I realized something awful and liberating. I didn't care. Not in this moment. For one heartbeat, I let myself accept the treason I'd chosen. Every law I'd ever lived by fell silent in the face of what we'd just done. I didn't speak again. Neither did he. We just stood there, suspended between the fire of the kiss and the ice of its consequences. And the world waited. The kiss was barely cooling on my lips when something tugged at the corner of my vision. A faint glint, sharp, deliberate at the far edge of the property. My stomach plunged. I froze. Theron did too. His body went rigid, shoulders tensed, jaw set. His fingers trembled, just slightly, betraying the panic he usually kept buried under layers of control. "What?" he started, but I cut in, whispering, "There, a shift. Too exact to be wind, too intentional to be coincidence." Every instinct in me flared bright red. The warmth between us turned thin as glass. The intimacy, the surrender, the kiss, it all became a liability so sharp it hurt. The mole had timed this, used our distraction, exploited our weakness. Theron's eyes met mine briefly, dark, sharp, alive with fear he didn't know how to hide. The mole had arrived on the tail of our unraveling. A soft metallic sound echoed through the wreckage. A hinge, a latch, a trap. Desire curdled into dread. We stayed where we were, not because it was smart, but because neither of us could move. Not yet. Not until we understood what the mole had just seen or done. The ruins seemed to breathe around us. Every creak felt like a threat. Another glint flickered at the edge of the property. My pulse pounded, faster than it had during the attack. The mole wasn't just observing. They were preparing their next move, and our humanity had become ammunition. I shivered, and for the first time, I didn't want to turn away. Not yet. Not until I knew exactly what was coming. We didn't get a second to breathe before the next blow landed. A folder, too neatly placed on the broken console, caught my eye. The edges crisp, the seal perfect, waiting. Theron saw it the same moment I did. His hand twitched, not protectively, but in recognition of the danger humming off it. I already knew what it was before I touched it. The mole's trap. laid with surgical precision. I lifted the folder and my pulse crashed hard. The first thing inside was the maid's handwriting, meticulously forged, disturbingly accurate, a coded transmission disguised as a casual report, and every line pointed to me. My name threaded through the margins, my approval implied, my staff implicated, every timestamp arranged to look like I'd orchestrated something unforgivable. The framing wasn't just strong, it was airtight. Theron's jaw locked, his fingers curled into fists. He didn't need to say anything. We both knew what we were looking at. I traced the handwriting, the seal, the calculated lies. It was insulting how perfect it was, exact in detail, devastating in implication. Crafted not only to accuse, but to isolate me, to make me doubt everything and everyone around me. And I realized, with cold certainty, that I couldn't even call it unfair. The mole had played the game exactly the way survival demands. They'd built a masterpiece. And I was standing helplessly in the center of it. The air thickened around me. Breathing felt impossible. Theron scanned the room, eyes sharp, but even he couldn't soften this blow. The evidence existed, tangible, precise, irrefutable. Panic surged fast and brutal. The mole hadn't just set a trap, they'd crafted an ending. Impossible, I whispered, my voice barely sound. They made it perfect. The folder shook in my hands. The mole had made sure I'd be the one to find it, and all I could do was stare. I stared at the folder and the world tilted sideways. It wasn't just the timing, not just the placement. It was the way it was built, every detail surgically designed to be undeniable. Handwriting, coded transmission, annotations, the careful threading of my name through every supposed act. Not sloppy, not careless, perfect. The mole hadn't just framed me. They'd built a fortress of deception so airtight that even Theron could hesitate. His eyes flicked to mine, and I saw something new. Doubt, not casual suspicion. A gnawing hesitation, the kind that creeps in when intellect collides with seemingly irrefutable truth. My stomach twisted. The mole had planned this moment for him as much as for me. The intimacy we'd shared minutes ago, my hand on his shoulder, my whispered confessions, that fragile trust, wasn't collateral. It was bait. They had waited for our walls to drop, for our guard to fall, and then they struck. Timing wasn't an accident. Every detail of that folder was a scalpel, positioned to exploit us at our most vulnerable. My chest tightened. This wasn't just political sabotage, it was cruel artistry. Every line of that transmission, every faux note from the maid, designed to make betrayal feel immediate, personal, intimate. They didn't just want to accuse me, they wanted Theron to feel it. To see me not as a victim, but as reckless, foolish, maybe even complicit. I realized, with a sick twist of the gut, that anyone else, even the most skeptical, would see that folder and think irrefutable. Not a single crack left for doubt. Too precise, too clever, too impossibly neat. I almost admired it. Almost. And then I saw it. The cruelest stroke. The evidence didn't just implicate me. It mirrored the truth of what I had given Theron in confidence. My trust, my vulnerability, my pain. Twisted now into the instrument of our ruin. The very act that had made us human was now leverage for destruction. Theron's jaw tightened, the muscle rigid under my gaze. I wanted to reach for him, shield him from seeing how perfectly the mole had weaponized our moment, but even that instinct felt powerless. The folder lay between us like a silent verdict. There was no hiding from it, no escape. The mole had executed a masterstroke, a psychological trap so precise, so clean it attacked everything we had just shared. And worse, it planted doubt in the one person I had trusted completely. I swallowed hard. My hands trembled. It wasn't just a frame. It was an assault on intimacy, loyalty, fragile trust. And in that instant, I understood. The mole's final move was personal. Brutally, devastatingly personal. The kiss still burned across my lips and under my skin. Every nerve alive, every pulse tuned to him, to the stolen moment we'd claimed. Trust, confession, surrender, all tangled in heat and fear. And then my eyes fell on the folder again. Time froze. That folder wasn't just evidence. It was a scalpel cutting through everything we'd built. Clean edges, perfect ink, stamps aligned. Someone had thought of everything. While we kissed, while we let ourselves be human, while we let our masks fall. The warmth drained from my body like the room itself had emptied of air. Cold dread settled in every beat of my heart. The bliss, the reckless, fated bliss we just shared had been contaminated, turned into leverage, accusation, the perfect weapon against us. Against me. Theron didn't move at first. Hands clenched, body tense, jaw rigid. I saw it. The struggle to control himself, not to shatter, not to break the illusion of calm. His eyes flicked to the folder, then back to me, asking a silent, scorching question. Do you believe her? The realization hit like thunder. This wasn't accusation. It was war. Our walls fell. Our trust, our desire, our confessions, they had been turned into a trap. And now, staring at that perfect forgery, the implications landed like a hammer. Every detail designed to destroy me, to shake Theron's belief in me down to dust. I wanted to shove the folder aside, bury it under my hands. Tell him it's a lie. You know it's a lie. But my body betrayed me. The grief, the stolen kiss, the stolen trust was heavier than any defiance I could muster. My fingers twitched, reaching for something already gone. Theron's gaze didn't waver. He was caught between what he wanted to believe, our truth, our connection, and the brutal evidence before him. I saw the storm in his eyes, tightrope between loyalty and doubt, desire and duty. The folder lay immaculate and merciless. I knew it would convince anyone else. That knowledge cut deeper than any blade. The mole had crafted the perfect psychological weapon. The surrender we just shared was now the instrument of our undoing. Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. My chest still ached, my lips still tingled, but it felt fleeting, meaningless, tainted. Every heartbeat screamed the collision of our highest intimacy and our lowest vulnerability. And the question burned, unspoken but deafening. Who do you believe? Theron's eyes searched mine. Defiance coiled with grief in my stomach. Grief for the lie, grief for the stolen trust, grief for the stolen kiss. His answer could destroy us both. I swallowed. Dry throat, trembling hands. Bliss replaced by the mole's cruelty, by the knowledge that love could be a weapon. That question remained, terrible and silent. Who do you believe? The folder sat there, daring us to survive it. The weight settled in my chest like stone. The warmth of the kiss was drowned out by it. The mole's final move, cold and precise. I saw it in Theron too, hands tightening, stance shifting, eyes measuring the world in that instant. It wasn't just evidence. It was a challenge, a test no one should face. Trust the truth of a heart or surrender to the unshakable force of proof. I wanted to reach for him, to anchor him. But our bond, the raw connection forged in near-death, confession, a stolen kiss, balanced on a knife's edge. One wrong move, and it would all shatter. He stayed frozen, then moved. Not a word, not a glance away, a deliberate choice. His hand slid the folder sideways, just slightly, but everything shifted. He didn't destroy it, didn't confront it, simply moved it, hiding it from the light, from the room, from me. And the answer screamed louder than words. He had chosen. He had chosen me. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to that single impossible truth. But danger didn't vanish. The evidence remained. Stakes unchanged, survival now balanced on a knife edge. Theron stepped closer, too close for rules, duty, or reason. His presence filled the space between us. Gravity I couldn't resist. Everything depended on what came next. Because the mole's trap wasn't finished. Neither were we. Barely an hour after the kiss, reality exploded back in. I woke with the taste of him on my lips, warmth in my chest I couldn't shake. My heart wanted to linger in that perfect surrender, but reality didn't care. The evidence sat in the back of my mind, precise and razor sharp. The forged confessions, the coded transmissions, the perfect trap. Then the hooves hit stone. Official riders. The sound shredded any sanctuary of intimacy. Our time was up. The mole's plan was moving. And we were exposed, still intoxicated by closeness we shouldn't have had. I pushed myself up, moving through the quiet room. Each echo in the hall felt like the mole's laughter. Every shadow, a conspirator. My fingers brushed the chair where he'd last touched me. Intimacy and trap colliding in one impossible contrast. Fear had never been so intertwined with desire. The kiss was over. The danger had only begun. The riders arrived like a storm. Hooves pounding, bodies urgent. The leader's voice cut the air. Elara Vanya. By order of the council, you are to return immediately. A security breach has been reported. My chest seized. Security breach, the mole's language. The stolen intimacy of last night became the prelude to disaster. I forced my posture upright. Theron mirrored me, precise, controlled, authoritative. No secret smiles, no shared warmth, not here, not yet. We mounted. The estate shrank behind us, swallowed by urgency. My mind raced through every breach, every hint of exposure. Could we survive the council meeting with this waiting for us? Could we survive at all? The towers of the citadel rose into view. The kiss was over. The political battle had begun. Inside the gates, everything changed. Public, cold, calculated. Theron's hand, his warmth, the memory of our surrender, had to be buried behind rigid expression. Every step down marble corridors had to scream disdain, distance, detachment, and yet I felt him close enough to sense heat, far enough to hide the truth. At the right moment, a subtle coated brush of thumb against forefinger, our secret. We were still in this, together. Internally, my pulse roared. Desire and relief ache from the kiss, outwardly, controlled, cold, indifferent, perfect performance. The thrill was vicious, untouchable. No one could read our truth. But the next move would demand everything, stakes higher than ever. Controlled calm shattered in the council chamber. Doors swung open, air thick. The High Council of Aegis seated in a crescent, eyes sharp and cutting. Long shadows, gilded chairs, subtle tension in robes. Every detail screamed judgment, every glance a blade. Seraphina, poised at the far end. Eyes wide, hands folded, careful concern, lethal beneath the surface. Predator hiding in plain sight. I centered myself, posture perfect. Breath measured, but every nerve screamed trap. Every council member armed with knowledge, power, and perhaps already briefed on the sabotage. Theron's gaze met mine, shielded, calculating, but no comfort. Not here. The council's eyes pressed like 1,000 blades, the rustle of robes, the shift of papers, every syllable heavy. My pulse drummed, panic tempered only by the mask I'd mastered over years of service. Seraphina's smile flicked, thin, sharp, enough to make me shiver, safe. Comfortable, but deadly. The moment of reckoning had already arrived. I had to walk this hall like I belonged, untouchable. Every step a gamble, every glance a reminder. The sabotage wasn't just political, it was personal, and I was standing in its center. The moment I'd prayed for, a pause, a breath, any scrap of mercy, never came. The council leader cleared his throat, and the entire chamber seemed to cinch inward like a snare. "A confession has been recovered," he said, slow and deliberate, each word dropping like metal into water. My stomach lurched. I braced for one of the mole's traps, but the next line hit harder than any I'd imagined. "From your own household, Lady Elara, details of actions, intentions, and a cipher that implicates you directly in the sabotage of Aegis protocols." It wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. The precision, the cadence, the accusation hanging in the air like venom. My pulse kicked against my ribs, frantic and disbelieving. The maid's confession, or rather, the forgery they were calling her confession, sat on the table for the council to admire. Next to it, a folded strip of paper, my cipher, or a flawless imitation of it. My hand, my strokes, my smallest habits, copied so perfectly my skin crawled. The room's attention pinned me in place like I was already sentenced. My throat dried instantly. I wanted to scream that it was all fake, to tear the papers into shreds, to burn the entire display to ash. But I couldn't move, couldn't speak. Horror draped over me like a cold, suffocating cloak. The evidence was so meticulous that any objection would look like desperation. And then the council leader twisted the knife. He recited the detail I'd sworn would never leave my own mind, a private ritual I'd once mentioned to the maid in a throwaway moment, something no outsider could possibly know. He described it perfectly. That tiny, hidden part of my life, dragged out, distorted, weaponized. Across the chamber, Theron's jaw went rigid. His fingers flexed once, restrained, controlled. He didn't move to defend me. Not yet. The council leaned forward, eager for the spectacle of my guilt, ready for a confession that would never come. I tried to speak, tried to force the simplest words through my teeth. "It's a lie." But they splintered in my throat. Every instinct screamed that defending myself now would only tighten the noose. The forgery was too perfect. My denial, no matter how honest, would look like panic. Heat flashed under my skin, invisible to everyone but me. The truth hit with sickening clarity. Every conversation, every mundane moment with that maid had been observed and twisted into ammunition. The mole hadn't forged evidence. They'd engineered a masterpiece. All I could do was stand in the center of the chamber and watch my life get rearranged into someone else's narrative. The room waited. The world waited. And I had nothing. No shield, no defense, no voice. Surviving this wasn't going to be about skill. It would come down to trust. And the only person I might trust was the one man whose eyes I couldn't risk meeting. The council leader's words barely finished before every gaze snapped to me like a whip. I felt it hit my skin before I even looked up, the collective hunger for my guilt. The chamber stretched around me, vast and suffocating. Every stare pressed in, sharp and unrelenting. It felt like there wasn't enough air in the room to fill my lungs. The ceiling loomed. The polished panels seemed to throw the judgment back at me from every angle. I wanted to fold into the floor, disappear, be anywhere but under the weight of those eyes. Even the aides and scribes, usually invisible, watched me with thinly veiled interest. I was the accusation incarnate, standing where diplomacy used to shield me. Not today. Then I saw him. Theron stood apart from the council, but his gaze was locked on me, unreadable, immovable. No condemnation, no reassurance, nothing I could anchor to, nothing I could trust. It was worse than if he'd glared. I searched his face for the smallest flicker, any hint that he didn't believe the lie, but he held himself still as stone. And that cold uncertainty carved deeper than any accusation the council could concoct. Fear crawled up my spine, settling under my ribs. My survival depended on him, not the council, not strategy, not skill, him. And I couldn't tell what he saw when he looked at me. My fingers trembled barely, only I felt it. I wanted to speak, to explain, to beg someone to see the truth, but no sound emerged. Every instinct for self-preservation told me that opening my mouth now was suicide. The mole had won the first round. They'd stripped me bare, left me exposed in the center of the room, and handed the council the perfect lens to interpret every twitch as guilt. And Theron's unreadable eyes, quiet, intimate, devastating, held the question the council didn't have the audacity to ask aloud. Do you believe her? For the first time, the terror wasn't about the council. It was about him. About being seen. Completely, painfully seen. And I wasn't sure which would break me faster, their judgment or the possibility of his. The moment the council's full attention hit me, the floor seemed to drop away. My pulse slammed in my ears, scrambling thought into raw instinct. Run. Not a strategy, not a plan, just a primal command thrumming through every nerve. Get out. Doors, windows, passages, anywhere. My mind mapped escape routes at lightning speed, cataloging angles, guards, blind spots. The world narrowed to corridors and shadows, and still, Theron's eyes on me. Steady, impossible to read. That should have grounded me, but it only cut deeper. Did he believe them? Did he believe me? The uncertainty scraped against my ribs like claws. Control is safety, I reminded myself. Useless, fragile. I imagined darting for the main doors, too many guards. The side corridor, too exposed. The servants' passage, narrow but possible. My heart raced. My lungs burned. Every option screamed risk. Then the stakes sharpened into something colder. If I ran, I wouldn't just doom myself. I'd doom him. Us. The panic surged again. Two forces colliding. Flight clawing at one side of my skull, loyalty gripping the other. My legs tensed. I was seconds from bolting. And then, a shift. Theron didn't step forward, didn't speak, didn't extend so much as a finger. But something in his stance, an invisible tether, caught me. For the first time since this nightmare began, I hesitated. I stayed rooted. The escape routes dissolved, one by one, until only one path remained. Not out of the chamber. Through him, through whatever truth he held, whatever belief or disbelief he kept locked behind that impassive face. Every instinct begged me to run, but everything I cared about depended on staying. I wasn't breathing when the room snapped into motion. 1 second, I was drowning under the council's gaze. The next, Theron moved. Not dramatically, not recklessly, just enough. He stepped forward with the kind of authority that made the air shift around him, controlled, devastatingly calm, and impossible to oppose. The interrogation must be private, he said, voice sharp as a blade. Immediate. Further discussion risks diplomatic fallout. I'll oversee it myself. Shock flickered through the chamber, a ripple of whispers. They knew he was bending protocol, nearly breaking it, but no one challenged him. He had drawn a line. On my behalf. Hope punched through me so fast it hurt. I couldn't tell if it was loyalty or recklessness or something more complicated, but he'd done it anyway. His eyes found mine, a command woven through the quiet storm in them. Trust me, not yet. Follow my lead. I straightened, forcing composure back over the chaos inside me. The council still watched. I couldn't show weakness. Not now. We walked toward the door together, every step a risk. If he misstepped, if I did, we were finished. And then the door shut behind us, Silence swallowed the chamber, and I realized that what came next would be far worse. The moment the door closed, the air changed. The judgment outside dissolved, replaced by a tighter, more intimate pressure. The room was small, bare, almost stern, a single window, books, candle wax, nothing comforting, nothing forgiving. Theron didn't look at me at first. He scanned the room, the corners, the shadows, the exits. Every part of him was pulled taut. I tracked every subtle shift in his shoulders, wondering how long he'd planned this, how many pieces he'd moved to get us alone. I didn't trust the room. I didn't trust myself. And I didn't know if I could trust him. Not here. Not like this. A desk separated us, too wide to bridge and too thin to matter. My pulse thudded against my ribs. Escape routes, defenses, strategies, they all flickered uselessly around the edges of my panic. He finally turned. That gaze, cold, unreadable, deliberate, landed on me like a verdict. The room wasn't just a room. It was a crucible. Locked, sealed. No masks left to hide behind. No audience, no protocol. Just him. And me. And the truth neither of us could speak safely. I took a shaky breath, feeling the weight of every possibility crushing the space between us. Fight or flee pulsed in my bloodstream, but neither instinct meant anything now. I was already cornered, and I knew this was only the beginning. The instant the room settled, he changed. Theron, the man who'd kissed me, who'd risked the council's wrath for me, was gone. In his place stood the prince, cold, precise, untouchable. "Elara Vanya," he said, voice steady and stripped of warmth. "The council requires a full accounting of your actions regarding the sabotage." The formality hit like a slap, not because it was harsh, but because it was him saying it. Every word carved distance between us. I forced myself to meet his stare. My heart hammered so loudly I was sure he could hear it. His hand on the desk trembled once, barely, but I caught it. He was holding himself together with sheer will. "I have nothing to hide, Your Highness," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I acted within my duty. His gaze sharpened. "Duty doesn't excuse failure. Evidence has been presented that implicates you in threats to the treaty and the stability of the kingdom." Each word was cold steel, but beneath them, I could feel him straining against the mask, the tension in his jaw, the flicker of conflict in his eyes. It made my chest ache. He pressed on. "Explain your presence at the Eastern supply lines. Explain the intercepted communications. Clarify your actions during the critical hour." The room tightened around us. Every syllable was a test, not of my innocence, but of our trust, of whether he still believed me, of whether I could risk believing him. I lifted my chin, steadying myself for the fire, and then the door opened. I went still. Serafina slipped in with a stack of documents, all serene grace and polished poise. But the air sharpened around her, the way it always did. She handed Theron the papers, then leaned in, just enough for her whisper to reach him alone. "You know what he did before?" she murmured. "Can you really trust him to protect her? Or anything?" Her voice could have cut stone. I watched it land. A tiny flicker in Theron's expression, barely a twitch, but I felt it like a blow. She'd planted doubt with surgical precision, dredging up old wounds I'd never fully understood but always sensed. Rage flared, hot and wild. I wanted to tear her out of the room, but I stayed still, locked in place by fear and strategy. Theron didn't react, not outwardly, but I saw the moment she hit her mark, felt it ripple through the space between us. Serafina smiled, delicate and poisonous. "I'll leave you to it." Then she vanished like she'd never been there at all. But her words stayed. Theron's composure wavered, barely, but enough for me to see the battle he was fighting behind those eyes. Authority on one side, old ghosts on the other. And somewhere in the middle, us. My fists curled under the table, nails biting into my palms. She wasn't trying to undermine him. She was trying to break us. And the worst part? She almost had. The silence she left behind was suffocating, heavy enough to crush. Theron's gaze slipped back to mine, haunted, questioning, almost pleading. And I knew then with cold certainty that the mole's strategy wasn't just political destruction, it was intimate destruction. Personal, surgical. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about trust, about fire, about whether we could hold the line before everything collapsed, and the war was only beginning. Theron's eyes snapped to mine, sharp, unforgiving, but the veneer cracked around the edges. A twitch in his jaw, the slight rise in his shoulders before they slumped that fraction of an inch. I'd seen him command battalions without blinking, stare down assassins like they were inconveniences, navigate whole councils without losing breath. But here, in this cramped study with its stale air and accusing silence, he looked almost human, breakable, torn in two. He pushed the stack of papers toward me, the mole's masterpiece, the council's gospel truth. His hand hovered over mine a heartbeat too long, trembling at the edges. Not much, just enough that I felt it like a spark between us. For a second, I thought he might fold under the weight of what he was about to demand. "Defend yourself," he said, clipped and formal, the council's voice wearing his face. But the crack was there, the tiniest catch, the smallest fracture in his armor. He was choosing between duty and us, and every muscle in his face telegraphed the pain of it. I swallowed and held his stare. If I looked away, I risked losing whatever thread still bound us. And beneath the tension, the memory of that kiss flickered, hotter than any accusation, sharper than the blade they'd laid at my throat. His eyes searched mine, dark and stormed over, like he was reaching for a truth only we shared. I wanted to tell him I hadn't betrayed him, that I was still on his side. But the words would have sounded like pleading, and pleading would only weaken him. His fingers shook again, barely perceptible. I wanted to reach across the desk and steady him. God, I wanted to. But I stayed rigid, watching him battle himself. Every breath, every flicker, every little collapse of composure was a message I had to read perfectly. "You need a defense," he said again, softer this time, the command dissolving under the weight of everything he didn't say. "I'm scared for you. Don't make me lose you." That glimpse behind his armor hurt more than the accusation. Because even surrounded by lies and forged evidence, he was still fighting for me. Against fear. Against the past. Against the mole's precision. My next move would save us, or burn everything down. I stared at the papers, the forged cipher, the twisted confession, and then I did the one thing no one expected. I pushed them away, just swept them aside like the props they were. Silence deepened around us. I felt every pulse in my body, every beat thrumming through my chest, steady and electric. A strange calm rolled through me, terrifying in its clarity. Theron didn't move. His jaw tightened. His hands hovered over the edge of the papers like touching them might shatter the room. His eyes locked onto mine, sharp, searching. He felt it too, the shift, the risk I was about to take. "I won't defend myself," I said. My voice didn't tremble. It didn't even rise. It was quiet, cold, absolute. Shock flickered across his face, fast and fierce. "I'll tell you the truth," I continued. "Every mission, every choice, none of it was what the council thinks." His hand twitched. Not from accusation this time, but disbelief. He wanted to stop me. I could see that. But the part of him that trusted me, even now, held him still. I slid the papers farther away. They didn't matter anymore. Not here. Not with what I was about to admit. My mask was gone. Every lie I'd wrapped around myself for survival burned away. "I'll tell you everything," I said quietly, "but you need to understand, what you see isn't betrayal. It's the only path we ever had." A flicker crossed his eyes. Fear, hope, something dangerously close to faith. Whatever it was, it pulled the room tight around us. The crucible had begun. I took a breath that scraped like glass on the way out. I wasn't the mole. Theron went rigid. His hands hovered over the table, trembling the way his voice never did. I let him look, let the truth sit between us with nowhere to hide. "I was assigned to gather intelligence," I said. "Interception. Undermining sabotage. Quiet work to keep the treaty from collapsing if someone tried to use it against us." The confession spilled out clean, heavy. The truth of years I'd buried. "Every secret move I made," I said, "wasn't for me. It was for the kingdom. For the treaty. For the people who don't get to see how fragile this all is." His eyes softened, barely, but enough to make my heart knock hard against my ribs. Dangerous softness, the kind that could ruin him if anyone else noticed. "I even had a safeguard," I said, a phrase embedded in a cipher, proof only a select few would recognize if I were ever framed. I let that settle. The room felt too small for all the truth pressing against its walls. "I hid nothing I wasn't ordered to hide," I said, the tremor in my voice finally breaking through. "Appearance, yes. Deception, yes, but never loyalty." The forged evidence between us suddenly looked like a child's trick, but I had no illusions about what this confession meant. It was treason to honesty itself. Theron's hand drifted closer to mine, a tiny, involuntary reach. But I didn't take it. This truth was mine alone. I'm done hiding, I said. You have everything now. And with that, the crucible hit its peak. A sharp, terrifying clarity settled over me. I'd crossed a line that had no return. Not just politically, personally. I'd handed Theron every piece of myself. Every risk, every truth I'd kept razor close for years. And now my entire fate balanced on him. I've done everything I was told, I said quietly. And somehow that makes me enemy to everything I swore to protect. His stare locked onto mine, haunted, conflicted, impossibly unreadable. I was no longer just vulnerable to the council. I was vulnerable to him. I leaned forward, unable to stop myself. The air between us felt charged, suffocating. Now you know everything, I whispered. Judge me. The words fell like a blade. No mask, no shield, no lifeline. Whatever came next would be his choice alone. And for the first time, I realized how terrifying trust could be. I felt the last confession coiling in my throat, heavier than anything before it. The plan was never just espionage, I said. It was leverage, control, a way to prevent a war no one could survive. Theron's hands gripped the table hard enough that the wood creaked. If the treaty collapsed, I continued, entire cities would burn, armies would march. This wasn't about reputation, it was about survival on a scale people refused to understand. His face twisted. Conflict, fear, calculation, all warring under the surface. That's why you can't judge me like the council would, I said. Not yet. If I fall, this balance falls with me. The air thickened. My heart hammered hard enough to shake my ribs. You're not choosing between me and the council, I whispered. You're choosing between war and peace. Silence dropped like a stone. I'm not asking for mercy, I said. I'm giving you the truth. The rest is yours. I folded my hands, steady, unflinching. I'd placed everything, my life, my mission, the fate of thousands into his hands, and he knew it. The room was already suffocating when the door clicked open. I didn't have time to brace. Serafina entered like a blade wrapped in silk. She set a slim folder on the table. Ordinary looking, devastating. Theron's face changed first. His jaw locked. His knuckles whitened. My stomach dropped. I thought the timing was important, she said sweetly. Her gaze sliced to me, lingered like she enjoyed the cut, then drifted back to Theron. I knew before I touched it, but I touched it anyway. My name, my seal, my cipher, backdated, perfectly forged. Every line designed to make it look like I'd betrayed him after the kiss, after the truth, after everything. The mole hadn't just outmaneuvered me, they'd made it personal. Theron's hands trembled again, just enough to break me. He was unraveling, trying to weigh instinct against evidence, against fear, against us. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I wanted to tear the folder apart, but I was frozen. Serafina didn't linger. She didn't need to. The damage was surgical. She walked out, the door clicked shut, and the silence that followed felt like a grave lowering. Theron looked destroyed. Shock, horror, and a spark of doubt he was trying and failing to extinguish. I realized then that the mole wasn't just after my destruction. They were after ours. Serafina returned minutes later, this time with the full weight of authority behind her. By order of the council, she said, crisp and merciless, Elara Vanya is to be taken into custody immediately. Your engagement to Prince Theron is dissolved, effective now. Any resistance will be treated as an act of hostility against the assembly. The blow was clean, brutal. Final. I kept my chin lifted even as my world narrowed. No shaking, no pleading. If they were going to cut me down, they wouldn't see me fall. Theron didn't speak. His eyes were on me, unreadable and burning. His hand hovered near the folder, the lie that now outweighed my truth. Serafina offered a mock-pitying smile. For your dignity, of course. My blood went cold. I leaned forward, voice quiet, but sharp enough to draw blood. I understand, but you should understand something too. Whatever the council decrees, it won't change what I've done, or why. Theron's eyes flickered. Just a fraction, but I saw it. Serafina smirked as if she'd already won. But the next move was his. Law or trust, duty or us. I held his gaze, steady, unbroken. The knife edge had never felt sharper. Theron's eyes flicked between me and the folder on the table. Everything sat there in stiff, manufactured clarity, dates, codes, signatures, a perfect little noose. My pulse hit a rhythm that could have rattled the walls. I couldn't look away. His choice, trusting me or trusting the ink, was hanging in that split second. And there it was, the hesitation, the smallest shift in his pupils, the way his jaw tightened, not defensive, but calculating. He was running the angles. The council wanted an easy conviction, a neat villain. They'd built the evidence with surgical precision, but something in him wasn't matching the story the paper insisted on. I held my breath as he leaned back a fraction. Not much, just enough to put distance between himself and the folder, but it felt like a shield. His fingers hovered at the edge, then he let it slide away from him. Slow, careful, deliberate, a silent refusal to let the lie define me, define us. I stayed locked on him, reading every microscopic shift. He was trying to reconcile two impossible things, the logic of espionage and the raw truth in what I'd told him. The fear he'd been wrestling for hours was tipping. Then he exhaled, small, quiet, but I felt it. His shoulders eased by a millimeter. Not surrender, not calm, but recognition. The truth I'd given him didn't fit the cruelty of the forged narrative. He had a choice right there. Follow the evidence, hand me to the council, and let politics win. Or trust the confession I'd handed him like a live weapon. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. And then he leaned forward again, closing a sliver of space, not enough to touch, just enough to show the shift. The folder was no longer a blade. It was just paper. His eyes found mine, sharp, steady, unflinching, and I understood everything he wasn't saying. He wasn't letting a lie decide who I was, who we were. And somehow, terrifyingly, I felt hope. The folder stayed on the table, but its power evaporated. He had chosen me, chosen us, and that single quiet act hit harder than any threat the council could manufacture. Nothing would be the same. Theron kept his hand over the folder for one heartbeat too long, then made the move that changed everything. He didn't touch it again, didn't even glance at it. He leaned back like he was shrugging off a century of inherited rules. I think, he said softly, each word precise, this is inconclusive. I froze. Just two calm words, but they landed like a declaration of war. He had rejected the evidence. All that cold, official-looking proof was suddenly meaningless. He'd chosen the human truth over the political one. My chest loosened so abruptly it almost hurt. Tears threatened, but I pushed them back. I only managed the smallest nod, hoping he saw it, hoping he understood what that choice meant. His gaze stayed on mine, steady, controlled, but not cold. And under it, I saw everything. The weight of his decision, the fracture in his lifelong discipline, the quiet defiance no rulebook could suppress. He wasn't protecting politics. He was protecting me. He leaned forward, resting his fingers lightly on the table, nowhere near the folder, just grounding himself, claiming the space, absolute. We proceed on the truth we have, he said, not on forgery. The council's trap cracked clean down the middle, and in that moment, something inside me eased for the first time in years. He believed me. He believed the part of me I'd buried the deepest, and that trust, terrifying, impossible, and real, felt like victory. And in its wake, I trembled. Because a choice like that doesn't come without consequences. And he'd made it anyway. I thought the silence might swallow the room whole, but then he said it. Not loud, not dramatic, just deliberate. We. It hit harder than any order or confession or threat. Not you, not I. We, a shift, a vow, a line crossed so quietly it was almost gentle. Almost. We were no longer two separate pieces trying not to collide. We were aligned. Bound, whether by trust or desperation or something worse, something better, I didn't know. But it was real. He leaned in slightly, and the cadence of his words shifted into that code we'd built over countless operations, the one only we understood. You take the east route, he murmured. Signal when the location is secure. We act together. Nothing else matters. There it was again, our new pronoun. Hidden in strategy, wrapped in discipline, but unmistakable. We, a small word. A seismic shift. I nodded once. Quiet, but full. Trust, agreement, surrender. The strange part? It didn't feel like losing control. It felt like finding a second center of gravity. First us. Theron didn't soften, he wasn't built that way. But the word hovered between us like a truth we couldn't unsay. We. And just like that, the alliance became real. The moment we stepped away from the edge of confession, everything sharpened. The fear didn't vanish, it transformed. Adrenaline replaced panic. And with Theron locked in beside me, the council's trap suddenly felt solvable. Timing, I said, the thought snapping into focus. She's counting on us falling apart. Panic makes us predictable. Theron's jaw tightened. Then she miscalculated. Perfect traps always crack when the architect gets arrogant. Her forged message, the last one, it's dated after our kiss, after the confession. She assumed we'd be too shaken to analyze anything. He gave a short exhale. She didn't anticipate how fast we think together. A pulse of something like exhilaration flickered through me. We trace her timeline backward. The handoff, the contradictions, the timestamps, the whole thing's too clean. Exactly. His voice steadied into the rhythm I knew, the us rhythm. She built a narrative, not a truth. We dismantle the sequence and expose the seams. We'll have to move fast, I murmured. If we hesitate, she readjusts. He lifted an eyebrow. Finish it. We hit with precision, I said. No chaos, no fear. She expects confusion. We bring clarity. And trust, he added quietly. Absolute. My pulse jumped. That was our advantage. Not strategy, not skill, trust. Theron's mouth twitched, almost a smirk. Ready? A thrill shot through me. Let's make her regret thinking she owned the board. And just like that, we were a single force in motion. The counterplan was alive, and for the first time, we weren't cornered. We were hunting. I saw the shift before he spoke, the weight of the next choice he was about to make. His calm had returned, but it wasn't the mask anymore. It was something heavier. Final. Elara, he said quietly, what we're about to do, the council won't let it slide. Once I defy them, everything I've built is gone. A cold line ran down my spine. Theron? I know what it costs. His voice didn't waver. My position, the succession line, everything hangs on this. One mistake and they'll crush me. Politically, personally, completely. Guilt and awe twisted together in my chest. He wasn't hesitating. He wasn't even looking for reassurance. He was stating a fact, the price he'd decided to pay. They'll strip me down to bone, he said. If the line shifts because of this, it'll be chaos, and our alliance, our bond, becomes a weapon in their hands. I stepped toward him, not touching, just anchoring. You don't have to. I do, he said, sharp but quiet. You trusted me with everything. I'm choosing you, but understand what that means. They won't forgive, and they won't wait. His choice landed like a blow. He hadn't paused. Not once. I'll bear it, I whispered. Whatever comes. His eyes softened, rare and raw. You already have. You survived. You trusted me. That was the first move. Now I make the next. Then quietly, almost like a confession, love makes fools of them all. The word pierced straight through me. Not tender, not dramatic, just honest. He leaned in, voice low. Ready yourself. After this, nothing is the same. We move together or we fall together. Awe, guilt, terror, relief, and something I couldn't name. I felt the full weight of what he was risking for me. For us, the edge was here, and we were already stepping over it. When we walked back into the council chamber, every head snapped toward us. The room tightened around us like a fist. Theron's hand brushed mine, brief, grounding. A quiet reminder, we stand together. He approached the podium with that familiar measured stride, the one that made entire armies behave. Today he was weaponizing it in a different direction. Esteemed council, he said, voice steady enough to slice through the room. The evidence presented against Elara Vanya is inconclusive. I call for an immediate halt to any judgment or arrest. The shock was instant. Whispers cracked through the chamber. The council leader froze mid-motion, the mask slipping in real time. Theron didn't blink. His jaw was set, his posture iron, but his eyes flicked to me. One heartbeat of connection, enough to say, I chose you, and I'll stand in the fire for it. Pride surged through me, sharp and bright. He wasn't just protecting me. He was letting the world see it. Let it be recorded, he said, turning back to the council leader, that any action taken against Elara Vanya without irrefutable evidence will be considered premature and politically unjust. Gasps, a ripple of outrage, disbelief. The room was seconds from combustion, but he was unmoved. And in that moment, I realized the real climax wasn't the evidence or the accusation. It was him. Standing before the council, staking everything on trust, on me. He stepped back from the podium, calm as stone. A spark of dangerous hope lit in my chest. He had chosen a side, our side, publicly, irrevocably. The council scrambled to regain control, but it didn't matter. The battlefield had already shifted, and Theron's eyes told me exactly whose fight it was now. Ours. The chamber was still vibrating with tension, whispers pinging off marble like warning shots. Council members sat stone still, some barely containing outrage, others scrambling for a plan B. And somehow, despite all the noise, the whole world had shrunk to the space between Theron and me. We didn't speak. We didn't have to. His eyes found mine, calm, deliberate, carrying that quiet spark I'd only ever seen when the mask slipped. The one that said, "I choose you." Always. It hit me deep, right where I'd spent years layering armor. That armor felt useless now, molten and soft and completely irrelevant. A tiny smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. I mirrored it, a sharp, fleeting flicker that meant I'm with you. I'm not going anywhere. Let the chamber rage itself hoarse. Let them decree, speculate, condemn. We'd already crossed the line that mattered, and we weren't walking it back. He leaned the slightest bit closer, enough that the whisper reached me without sound. We move next. It carried more weight than any ruling or declaration in that room. It wasn't even a plan, it was a vow. I took a breath, let it steady me, and finally, let the first spark of exhilaration slip past the fear. The mole had gambled on cornering us, but she'd misread the entire equation. We weren't two people dancing around distrust anymore. We were one unit. Clean, precise, dangerous. A brush of fingers, a shared look toward the intelligence board. No words, just motion. Our hunt had already begun. And in that instant, standing shoulder to shoulder with him, I knew nothing. No law, no threat, no betrayal could sever what we'd forged. Not now. Not ever. We were aligned, defiant, unshakable, and nothing in that chamber could touch us. Morning light slashed through the war room's windows, harsh and bright, cutting the maps into sharp shapes. The air felt heavier now, thick with the pressure of the entire summit humming just outside the door. Theron leaned over the central diagram, hand flat on the table, studying the web of lines we'd gone over 100 times. Today, though, they felt final. There was no margin for uncertainty. "I'm placing the decoy in the west corridor," I said, tracing the path. Tempting enough to pull her in, subtle enough not to scream trap. Theron nodded slowly. 10 seconds, he said. No more. His jaw was so tight it could have cracked, but his eyes, God, that look, held an almost unbearable trust. I exhaled once. "I'm ready, and if she senses hesitation?" I didn't finish. I didn't need to. His hand brushed mine, barely a touch, but enough to ground me. "We move as one," he said. "You take the cipher. I handle extraction. No second guessing. I trust you." The words hit like a steadying hand to my spine. "And I trust you," I said. We walked through every detail, timing, signals, contingencies, all with that strange rhythm that only came from us thinking in exact parallel. Logic and history intertwined, firmer than any alliance written on parchment. When we finally reached the last step, Theron held his hand over the map. "One shot," he said, "and I'm with you, all the way." Something loosened in me, equal parts relief and adrenaline. "Then we're ready," I said. He leaned in, voice barely above a whisper. "Together." "Together," I echoed. In the stillness of that war room, surrounded by maps that had dictated history, I felt it settle. Whatever happened next, we wouldn't be meeting it separately. We moved as one, and the clock was already running. By mid-morning, the room felt sharper, like every piece of paper had grown teeth. I was zeroed in on tiny anomalies in Seraphina's movements, the little gaps she probably thought no one would ever see. "Here," I said, tapping the mismatched timestamps. She assumed we'd react exactly the way she wanted. That's her flaw. Theron leaned over my shoulder. "You're saying she underestimated us?" "And overestimated herself," I murmured. "She's acting from revenge, not strategy. That's why these two signals don't line up. The crack is right here." He watched me with that quiet intensity he never wasted. "You're calm," he said softly. A short, humorless laugh escaped me. "Calm is something I earned with you. She doesn't understand what she's fighting. She thinks she knows us." His fingers brushed mine, accidental on purpose. "Then we hit her where it hurts, and we finish it." I traced the fracture in her plan. She can't adjust in time. All the motive in the world won't save her here. Theron's eyes met mine. Steady, absolute. "We exploit the flaw. And she'll never see it coming," I said. For the first time in days, clarity clicked into place with that adrenaline-sharp thrill of knowing the board was shifting under our feet, finally in our favor. She'd made her mistake, and we were ready. The message was small enough to fit in a palm and heavy enough to tilt history. Every coded word was calculated to perfection. If Seraphina took the bait, and she would, she'd reveal herself before the summit even opened. Theron studied me with that unspoken question. "Ready?" I passed the message to the courier. "It has to look real. Nothing that hints we're onto her." The courier disappeared down the hallway. My pulse tracked every step. Theron leaned just close enough that his sleeve brushed mine. We stay in sync. Every gesture is a signal. If she bites, we act fast. She's arrogant enough to bite, I said. That's what gets her. The arrogance, he murmured. Always the arrogance. We watched the hall, attention honed to a razor's edge. Footsteps, echoes, shadows. Everything felt like a trigger, but none of it rattled the strange electric calm between us. The courier returned with the slightest tremor in his hand. Theron squeezed my fingers. It's begun. Heat shot through me. Fear and exhilaration tangled so tightly I couldn't tell one from the other. Seraphina had taken the bait, and the trap was already closing. From the antechamber, I watched her take the message exactly the way we predicted. No hesitation, no suspicion, just that cool, smug confidence that made me want to snap her composure in half. She skimmed it with the poise of someone who believed she'd planned for every variable. Then she dispatched an aide with a flick of her hand, casual, almost bored. But that movement, that was the key, the final thread of her plan. She didn't know she'd already walked into ours. Theron leaned in. She has no idea, he whispered. I swallowed the jump of fury and triumph. Not yet. The aide walked down the corridor, carrying the seed of her downfall. And she watched him go with that faint smile I'd memorized, the one that said she thought she'd won. She would regret it, deeply. Theron squeezed my hand once, steady, grounding. It's all lining up, he murmured. Just wait. I could, barely, but I could. Soon, her perfect composure would crack, and I would see every second. We stepped into the corridor, leading to the great hall, like we'd rehearsed it our whole lives. Controlled steps, composed expressions. Threads of tension pulled taut beneath it all. Theron walked half a step ahead, not dominating the space, shielding it. A quiet anchor in a storm of eyes and rumors. When his sleeve brushed mine, a breath of warmth shot down my spine. It was deliberate. A silent reminder. We moved together. Every nod we offered, every sharp little court-perfect smile, it was all veneer. But beneath it, our synchronization was real, precise, alive. Anyone paying close attention could see it, though they wouldn't understand a thing. At the doors of the hall, he adjusted my cloak, barely a movement, almost invisible. But I felt it everywhere. We crossed the threshold as one. The hall opened up like a cathedral, gold, marble, history carved into every surface. Crystal lights fractured the morning sun, and leaders from all three nations fixed their eyes on us with the hunger of people who smelled blood in the air. My own leader locked eyes with me. Cold. Expectant. Clueless. He thought he owned me. Theron stood close enough that I could feel the certainty rolling off him. One quick glance between us, just a heartbeat, and my pulse leveled. We reached our positions at the front of the hall. Every sound around us faded into a distant hum. I forced a breath into my lungs. The summit was beginning, the world was watching, and the final act was already unfolding beneath their feet. We were ready, together. I felt it first in my chest, a low, heavy pressure spreading out like an invisible hand bracing itself against my ribs. Nothing in the great hall had changed. Same polished floors, same chandeliers, same echoing acoustics. Yet the place felt alive now, exhaling right against the back of my neck. Every eye wasn't just watching. They were waiting for me to slip, waiting for the summit to crack, waiting for Seraphina to strike. Theron's fingers brushed mine, light, accidental to anyone else. To me, it was an anchor cutting through the tension, and I needed it. Not because I was incapable, but because this was bigger than any single person, bigger than even my best instincts. The ticking clock in my mind felt like a hammer. Each beat lined up with my pulse, too fast, too aware. If we missed the moment by even a breath, the trap would fall apart. The treaty could collapse. Decades of fragile alliances could snap, and every leader here would look straight at us. The first domino. I steadied my breathing. Focus wasn't enough. I had to be the focus. The room faded into nothing but the angles we watched, the lines we tracked, the silent signals only Theron and I noticed. The rest of them, diplomats, monarchs, emissaries, thought they were watching the show Seraphina wrote. They weren't. We were rewriting it in real time. I pictured the trap with perfect clarity, the bait, the lure, the reveal. Every contingency threaded through my mind like constellations of cause and consequence. One slip and Seraphina's ambition would tear through us like a riptide. We had to stay calm, sharp, untouchable. My thoughts flicked to her. Seraphina, smug and convinced she'd anticipated everything. That was her flaw. Every calculation she'd made assumed she understood us, that she could read us, that the bond between Theron and me was fragile or temporary. She had no idea what she was walking into. My hands curled, then released. The pressure in my chest stayed, but I turned it into something usable. Control, precision, focus. The weight of the world wasn't a burden, it was a lens. Every glance, every breath sharpened through it. Theron leaned a fraction closer and gave the smallest nod, syncing to the same internal rhythm I was holding. It wasn't trust anymore. It was synchrony, absolute and complete. Two parts of the same mechanism, holding the world steady by sheer will. The countdown in my mind quickened. The moment was coming, and I couldn't afford a single flaw. Because if I failed, even for a heartbeat, it wouldn't just be a political disaster. It would be the end of everything we'd fought for. The end of us. I swallowed, letting the fear sharpen instead of paralyze. My nerves hummed, alive and wired for the strike. The world pressed down, heavy and relentless, and we were the only thing keeping it from breaking. The confrontation was close. Centuries of tension balanced on our hands, and I wasn't letting it slip. Serafina glided toward us like she owned the floor, poised, gleaming, dangerous. Her smile was smooth and cold, sweetened with venom, the kind that could ruin kingdoms if you let it in. My stomach twisted, but I kept my expression pristine. Every whisper and glance in the room counted. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing anything beneath my surface. "Your Highness," she purred, "you've handled the summit preparations admirably. One might think you'll actually secure peace." Her gaze slid past me to Theron, lingered a breath too long, then returned. A challenge wrapped in politeness. I smiled back, soft and spotless. "Thank you, Serafina. Your insights have been instructive." Her head tilted, eyes narrowing in calculation. "Oh, I trust your vigilance. One must be careful with certain alliances." The pause was long enough to sting. She thought she'd cornered us, thought we were seconds from breaking under the weight of our own plan. I kept my voice light. "Vigilance is essential," I said, even as I sliced through every layer of her implication in my mind. She didn't realize how transparent her arrogance was. She gave that delicate, condescending laugh and leaned in, voice dropping low. "I do wonder how long your composure will last once the walls start closing in." My pulse kicked, but my mask held. "We'll see soon enough," I murmured. Theron's fingers brushed mine, subtle, grounding. "Trust me, we're aligned, we're ready." Something in her expression tightened, barely a flicker, but I saw it. She didn't get what she came for. She stepped back with a brittle smile. "Well, I'll leave you to your important work." She drifted away, all poised arrogance. I exhaled, quiet, controlled. Not relief, satisfaction. The first wind of her storm had hit, and we hadn't budged. I met Theron's eyes. She thinks we're fragile. She has no idea she's already walking the path we set. Anticipation curled hot in my chest. The storm was coming, and we were ready. The hall blurred with movement, leaders, guards, aides, but I felt Theron like a tether at my side, steady and warm. The tension thickened until it hurt to breathe. Then he did it. He lifted my hand, gentle, deliberate, and pressed his lips to my knuckles. Slow, intentional, public. Everyone saw it, and yet the warmth in his eyes was only for me. My chest tightened, sharp and startling. There was no mask in that moment, no political choreography, just the truth of us, exposed in the most impossible place. I let the faintest smile flicker across my mouth, just enough to look composed. Inside, the joy hit like a lightning strike. Theron pulled back, still holding my gaze. The hall collectively relaxed, thinking they'd witnessed a polished performance. They had no idea. I exhaled quietly as the thrill settled into a fierce, intoxicating certainty. We were in this together, fully, openly. The trap still hummed in the background, waiting, but for that heartbeat, I felt untouchable. Because he'd chosen me. Here, now, and that choice was strength. The hall felt suspended, like even the air was listening. Everyone watched us, pretending to understand our poised performance, but they didn't see the truth sliding beneath it. Theron leaned closer, so slightly it barely existed, and the spark between us tightened. We weren't acting anymore. We were simply aligned. I pressed a finger briefly to his hand. Our signal. The final piece of the trap was in motion. He met my gaze and gave the smallest nod. A surge of certainty shot through me. Weeks of planning, danger, secrets. It had all forged something sharp between us. The thing she thought was our weakness had become our weapon. For the first time in days, I let myself feel it, the full weight of what we'd built together. Not a burden, a shield. His eyes flicked toward the far end of the hall, to the point where everything would converge. I followed. And in that shared glance, I understood the truth. We weren't just partners. We were the axis everything spun around. I tightened my grip. It's ready. He squeezed back. One. The world held its breath. Control didn't last long. Not when Serafina appeared again, gliding across the hall with that infuriating certainty, head high, smile smug, convinced she'd already won. My chest tightened. She still had the power to ruin everything. We'd planted the bait weeks ago. She'd swallowed it whole. Her paranoia was blooming exactly as we intended. Eyes darting, shoulders too stiff, every move sharpened by the fear she'd never admit. She walked toward the designated area. Each step was a countdown. She paused, just a fraction of a second, and realization flickered in her eyes. Something was off. She scanned the crowd, the exits, the spacing of the guards. Too late. Every escape route was already closed. My pulse hammered. Theron's hand brushed mine. Our signal. I squeezed back. Serafina took another step. Confidence faltering, arrogance fighting to hold. She was still trying to project control. But every step she took was exactly where we placed it. The buzz of the crowd swelled around us, oblivious. Theron and I stood at the center of it all, hearts pounding, waiting for the final turn. She had no idea she was walking into her own undoing. But what came next was worse. The moment hit like a crack of lightning. Months of preparation, rehearsals in stolen corners, whispered strategies. They all snapped into place. Theron moved first, precise as a blade. "Stop right there," he said, voice cutting clean across the hall. Serafina froze, fingers twitching toward the device that could destroy everything. I stepped in from the opposite side, measured, controlled, sealing off her escape. We didn't look at each other. Didn't need to. Our timing was perfect. Her expression faltered, tiny fractures spreading across her mask. "You're out of options," I said. Quiet, sharp, deliberate. She hesitated, calculating odds we'd already eliminated. Theron's hand brushed his ceremonial dagger, symbolic, but the room didn't know that. The crowd saw power, authority. I saw the man who'd anchored himself to my side through every storm. Realization snapped across Serafina's face. She saw the plan, saw how thoroughly she'd misread us, and saw that it was too late to stop any of it. She opened her mouth, maybe to argue, maybe to lie, but she didn't get the chance. "You leave me no choice," Theron said, "and we leave you none," I added. Her arrogance wavered, just for a heartbeat, but it was enough. The crucible had peaked. Every shadow we'd crossed, every risk taken, it all converged here, and beneath the fury and focus, something electric pulled tight in my chest. We'd done it. Together, the trap was real. It was final, and Serafina was caught. The hall went silent as every eye shifted to me. The pressure pressed against my ribs, sharp and suffocating. They were waiting, leaders, diplomats, soldiers, waiting for the truth I carried. Theron brushed my hand, a quiet anchor. I stepped forward. "It's time everyone sees the facts," I said, voice clear enough to cut through the room. One by one, I laid everything bare. The real cipher key, the one she forged. Her motive, ambition, twisted into vengeance. Her method, documents altered with surgical precision. Shock rippled through the hall, disbelief morphing into outrage. The people who trusted her looked gutted, betrayed. Theron stood behind me like a pillar, confirming every point without a word. His trust steadied me, strengthened me. I had cracked the code. I had traced every lie. I had exposed the rot. Serafina's entire facade collapsed under the weight of the truth. Her aides froze. Her plans crumbled in seconds. And I stayed calm. This wasn't just victory. It was revelation. Sharp, clean, irreversible. I glanced at Theron. A pulse of exhilaration shot through me. We'd survived the crucible. We'd executed the plan. And the world was finally seeing it. Then Serafina struck at her last target, Theron. "You think she's loyal?" Her voice dropped into something poisonous. "She'll turn. Just like the others. Just like the ones who betrayed you." The words hit him hard. I saw it. The flicker of old pain, the ghosts she tried to weaponize. But I didn't look at her. I looked at him. I held his eyes. Steady, unshaken. I let him see every truth I'd fought to hide. "I am not your enemy. I will not be the one who breaks you." Serafina leaned in, whispering venom. She'll use what you care about. She'll destroy you. Her heartbeat was frantic. Mine wasn't. Theron didn't flinch. He swallowed, jaw set, eyes locked on mine, and in that thin, fragile moment, he chose me over every ghost she tried to resurrect. I held his gaze until Serafina faltered. Her final strike failed. Our bond didn't crack. It hardened. She realized, too late, that this was the one battle she couldn't win. Her fear gave her away, and for the first time, I saw her truly cornered. I caught the change in his eyes before he spoke. A tiny flicker, a loosening of something that had held him hostage for far too long. Serafina's words still hung between us, sharp enough to draw blood, crafted to pull him back into the wreckage of old betrayals. She wanted him frozen there, but he wasn't. Not this time. He stepped forward, shoulders squared, jaw set, the kind of stance that didn't ask for attention, but demanded it. The great hall seemed to tilt with him, every gaze snapping to that simple, undeniable motion. "I choose my future," he said. Not loud, not theatrical, just the quiet force of someone done being ruled by his ghosts. And in that sentence, he chose me, openly, without shame or hesitation. The relief hit me before the room even reacted, a warm, sweeping rush that washed months of tension right out of my bones. His lie, the belief that emotion made him weak, that attachment would destroy him, cracked cleanly in that one declaration. I kept my eyes on him. Everything else blurred, the whispers, the shifting robes, the leaders trying to read the moment like a coded message. None of it mattered. Just him. Just the fact that he'd chosen us over every rule he'd carved into himself. Theron's eyes softened then, vulnerability and strength wrapped so tightly together it made my heartbeat trip. He was giving me everything he'd been too careful to offer before, and he was doing it in front of all of them. Serafina's mouth twitched, maybe searching for something cutting, something to salvage her control, but the words died before they formed. The room felt it. The finality, the weight of a battle she'd already lost. Not because of strategy or manipulation, but because she'd underestimated the one thing she couldn't break. I exhaled, shaky and long, letting relief carve out the last of the fear. It settled into something heavier, sweeter. Confirmation that every risk, every lie, every impossible step across the edge had brought us exactly here. I choose my future. And in choosing it, he mended not just the wounds she tried to reopen, but the ones he'd carried alone for years. He chose trust. He chose truth. He chose me. For the first time in longer than I wanted to admit, I let myself feel it. Bright, unrestrained relief, twined with the startling certainty that what we had was solid. The crucible had tested us and found us forged into something unbreakable. My fingers brushed his in a quiet acknowledgement of everything that had just shifted. The world could murmur or analyze or panic. None of it mattered. We'd chosen each other, and that was enough. Some part of me understood then, this wasn't an ending. It was the first real beginning either of us had ever had. The air changed the moment the royal guard moved. Serafina, fierce, vicious, so smug a heartbeat ago, stumbled under the weight of her own unraveling. Every calculated jab, every razor-edged accusation had funneled her straight into the trap she'd built herself. The guards closed around her with crisp precision, separating her from the crowd like a tide swallowing a lone stone. She fought, hissed, clung to whatever dignity she thought she had left, but it didn't matter. The hall watched in a taut, breathless silence as she was led away, her heels striking the marble like the ticking end of her influence. And just like that, the threat that had shadowed every waking moment, every heartbeat sharpened into strategy, was gone. The relief came fast, dizzying. My shoulders dropped before I could stop them. I pulled in a deep breath, one I didn't realize I'd been holding while she was still in the room. My hand, still resting lightly in Theron's, trembled, not from fear now, but from the aftermath of surviving it. The council leader stepped forward, face steady, voice gentled by something like respect. "Elara Vanya," he said, "we owe you an apology. Your loyalty and discernment preserve the integrity of this summit. Your innocence must be recognized." The words landed harder than I expected, not because I needed validation. I'd known the truth every step of the way, but because they crystallized just how much we'd risked and how close the blade had been. The hall shifted from tense silence into a murmured wave of realization. People recalibrated, understanding the full shape of what they'd just witnessed. And in that subtle chaos, exhaustion hit me. Real, bone-deep exhaustion from holding the storm in place. Theron's hand tightened around mine, grounding me, not commanding, not steadying out of duty, just there, with me, for me. I let the relief settle into all the places tension had lived for too long. The world outside would wake up again soon. Politics never truly slept, but for right now, we'd ended the threat. The truth that Serafina had tried to bury was out in the open, undeniable, and ours. We'd survived. And we hadn't just survived. We'd won. The room went perfectly still as the leaders of the three nations stepped forward. For a moment, it felt like even the air refused to move. One by one, they lifted their pens. Their faces were unguarded. Not careless, just honest. The tension that had ruled every discussion for weeks loosened as they bent over the parchment. I watched every precise gesture, every silent exchange. They weren't just signing a treaty. They were signing proof that everything we'd held together through deception and danger hadn't been for nothing. This was the outcome we'd bled for, strategized for, endured for. Theron brushed his hand against mine as he stepped closer, a small gesture that felt like an entire sentence. Then the first pen touched parchment with a sharp, clean scratch. The sound rang through the hall like a crack of lightning. Decisive, final. Then another, and another. Each signature felt like a thread pulling tight, binding months of chaos into something real, something earned. I let out a slow breath, the kind that only comes when the worst is behind you. The leaders straightened, meeting each other's eyes with the faintest ghost of shared relief. We had done this, not just avoided disaster, created something that would last. Theron's gaze found mine across the room, warm, certain, completely unguarded. And in that look, I felt every risk we'd taken lock into place. The last signature landed on the parchment, and the hall let out one collective exhale. Peace inked into permanence, and for the first time, satisfaction, deep, quiet, genuine, settled in my chest. This was victory, unmistakable and earned. The door shut behind us with a soft click, and the noise of the hall vanished like someone had cut a string. No voices, no rustling robes, no political theater humming in the background. Just silence. Blessed, heavy, perfect silence. I sat on the edge of the chaise, muscles stiff but finally unclenching. Relief pooled in slowly, so deep it almost scared me. Surviving the storm was one thing. Recognizing you survived it was another. Theron leaned against the door, framed in the waning gold from the hall. The faint creak of leather as he settled there felt more reassuring than any speech. His presence, steady, silent, had been the only constant through all of it. The room carried the scent of polished wood and fading candle smoke, small domestic comforts that felt like rare luxuries. I closed my eyes, letting exhaustion soak through me. My hands trembled lightly in my lap, not from fear, just from release. He moved toward me without a sound, but I felt him arriving before I opened my eyes. A shift in the air, a warmth, a closeness that wasn't political or performative. His hand brushed my shoulder. Quiet acknowledgement, quiet gratitude, quiet everything. We didn't speak. The silence said enough. We made it. We held the line. We won. Outside, the world was still sharp and loud and perilous, but here, wrapped in the quiet of the royal suite, none of it could reach us. Here we could just breathe. I glanced up and caught a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Soft, real. I mirrored it without thinking. A tiny exchange, but it felt like grounding after a lifetime of shifting sands. The world could wait. Tomorrow could wait. Tonight was ours, and the storm was finally over. Relief settled in the room like a warm blanket, humming quietly in the background. Neither of us rushed to break it. We just sat there, facing each other across a few feet of space that felt heavier than any battlefield. Eventually, I exhaled and met his eyes. "Theron," I said quietly, "I don't think I've ever been this sure of anything." He smirked just a little. "About surviving today?" I shook my head. "About us. About choosing this. I don't want to hide anymore." He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, jaw tight in that familiar way that meant he was about to tell me something honest. "I spent most of my life believing emotion was a liability," he said, "that caring too deeply would cost me everything." "You chose me," I said softly, "in front of everyone." He let out a short, real laugh, almost surprised by himself. "I choose my future," he said again, and the simplicity of it hit me harder than anything else today. "And my future is with you." Warmth spread through my chest, trembling and fierce all at once. Then no more pretending, I said, sliding my hand over his. We trust completely. We put us first. His grip tightened, not uncertain, not hesitant, certain. Always, he said, no matter what the kingdoms demand. The words settled into me like an anchor, steady and grounding. We talked then, really talked, carefully peeling back old scars, laying quiet truths between us like fragile offerings. I admitted the nights I doubted myself, the moments I wasn't sure trust was something I'd ever get back. He told me about the wounds Serafina nearly reopened, the fear of losing me to shadows he'd created himself. By the time the conversation faded, the room felt different, warmer, safer. Our truths didn't unsettle us. They settled us. I leaned back, my shoulder brushing his. We've changed the rules, I murmured. Everything else comes second. From now on, us first. His laugh was soft, unguarded. Us first. And for once, the phrase didn't scare me. It settled into my bones like truth. We stayed there in the quiet, holding the aftermath and the promise of what came next. Outside, the world still spun its chaos, but here, in the fragile safety of this moment, we had something steady, something that felt a lot like forever. The suite held that deep, sacred quiet, like the world itself was giving us a moment to just exist. I let myself sink into it, letting every mask fall away until it was just me. No throne, no strategy, no blade against my back. Theron sat beside me, close enough that I could feel the warmth of him brushing my shoulder. His heartbeat was steady, grounding. I leaned into him, not the diplomat, not the strategist, just me. I never thought I'd get here, I whispered, where I could just be seen. He tilted my chin up gently. His gaze didn't just meet mine, he understood it. You are, he said, completely. Something inside me loosened. Years of control, of pretending I didn't need softness, cracked just a little under the weight of being seen so clearly. His fingers laced with mine, warm and sure. Whatever comes next, he murmured, we face it as us. Nothing and no one comes before it, I said. Nothing and no one. A real smile, the rare kind I never wasted in public, broke across my face. He matched it, small and certain. Then he lifted me, slow and steady, holding me like the world outside had never tried to break us. I felt every thread of fear unwind as he kissed me, soft, deliberate, sealing everything we'd said and everything we were still too overwhelmed to put into words. When he pulled back, he rested his forehead against mine. Every day, he whispered, every choice, every heartbeat, I choose us. I choose us too, I said, and I meant it with every part of me I'd spent years guarding. We stayed like that, wrapped in the kind of quiet that felt like a vow of its own. All the chaos, the lies, the battles, they were outside now, unable to touch this. Here, we were unburdened, seen, loved. And as I rested my head against him, letting the silence stretch into possibility, I knew this wasn't an ending. It was our beginning. Steady, unbreakable, finally free.